Hi everybody. Welcome to a gentle drift backward in time. If you're lying comfortably, the pillow just the way you like it, the air quiet and still around you. Perhaps you've already begun to feel your eyelids grow a little heavier. That's perfect, because tonight we're not here for excitement. We're here for curiosity, for comfort, and for the quiet pleasure of discovering something unexpected about the past. Tonight's journey takes us somewhere often overlooked and rarely spoken of, except perhaps in hurried jokes or dusty textbooks. We're heading into the world of hygiene in the Middle Ages. Yes, hygiene. And no, don't worry. This isn't going to be a gruesome tour of medieval grime or a shocking account of historical filth. That's not what we do here. This is a story told slowly, with softness, and with a generous helping of gentle surprise. Think less history lecture and more late-night candlelit ramble through the winding lanes of a forgotten town. You see, hygiene in the medieval world isn't quite what people imagine. Somewhere along the way, perhaps in school or thanks to Hollywood, we came to believe that the past was a dark, smelly place where nobody ever bathed, everyone had bad teeth, and dirt was simply a part of daily life. But the truth, as ever, is more complicated, and in this case, more tender. People in the Middle Ages weren't indifferent to cleanliness. Quite the opposite, in fact. They cared deeply, sometimes even anxiously, about their health, their appearance, and the cleanliness of their souls. But of course, they lived in a world without running water, without modern soap, without the bright white sparkle of advertising campaigns promising 24-hour freshness. So instead, they used what they had. They washed their hands in basins of scented water. They combed their hair carefully with handmade tools. They sprinkled herbs in their clothes and bedding to keep the air sweet. They built bathhouses where neighbors came together to soak, to talk, and, sometimes, to gossip. They even created entire manuals about how to stay clean, many of which still exist today. Of course, the methods were different, sometimes charmingly so, sometimes a little puzzling, and yes, sometimes not quite effective. But always, behind it all, there was care, a desire to feel good, a belief that cleanliness mattered, not just for one's health, but for one's dignity. Over the course of this long and winding night, we're going to walk, very slowly, through the many layers of medieval hygiene. Each part of the journey will unfold a new scene, a different time, a different place, a different practice. We'll begin with the mindset, how religion, ritual, and seasonal rhythms shaped what people believed about the body and the soul. Then, we'll move through the daily habits of peasants and nobles alike. We'll peer into bathhouses, sniff the contents of old apothecaries, and marvel at the elaborate bathing routines of medieval queens. We'll learn what counted as soap, why monks washed more than knights, how people dealt with lice. Hint, it involved candles and patience, and what public restrooms looked like in a bustling medieval city. And along the way, we'll smile. Because the people we meet, though long gone, will feel strangely familiar. They too had awkward moments, morning breath, favorite perfumes, and days when they didn't quite feel fresh. They too made efforts, however humble, to present themselves well. They too, in their own time, tried. There's something deeply human about that. Now, this story will stretch across 22 parts, each about 1,000 words, just enough for you to drift deeper into relaxation as the hours pass. Some of these parts will linger in quiet country cottages, others will echo softly in the stone halls of medieval bathhouses or the hushed cloisters of a monastery. Each will bring a new texture, a new scent, a new reflection on a life both distant and familiar. But don't worry, you don't have to remember every detail. The story will be here, flowing like a calm stream, whether you're fully awake or halfway to dreams. Because truly, this isn't just about medieval hygiene. It's about noticing the small things, the way people lived, the way they cared, the way they adapted to a world without hot showers or hand sanitizer, yet still found ways to feel clean. So as you lie back now, perhaps the room dim, perhaps a little rain tapping gently on the window, imagine the flicker of a candle. Imagine the soft scrape of a wooden comb through clean hair. Imagine the sound of water being poured from a jug into a copper basin. And imagine yourself, not as a distant observer, but as a gentle traveler, quietly wandering through the centuries. Let's begin with where it all starts. Not with a bucket of water, but with a thought, a belief, a philosophy. In part 2, we'll explore how the medieval mind understood cleanliness, not just as a physical act, but as a spiritual one. We'll step into the shoes of monks, nuns, herbalists, and housewives and ask, what did it truly mean to be clean? But that is for next time. For now, simply rest. You're on the path already. As our journey through medieval hygiene gently continues, we must begin, not with soap or water, but with belief. Because in the Middle Ages, the act of washing was never just about the body. It was about the soul, the seasons, and sometimes the heavens themselves. To understand how people viewed cleanliness 1,000 years ago, we must first slip into a different way of thinking, one where the boundaries between the physical and the spiritual were not so clearly drawn. Where washing your hands before a meal wasn't just polite, it was an echo of sacred practice. Where bathing might be considered holy, or, in some cases, dangerously indulgent. Let us begin in a quiet place, a stone monastery, far from the clamor of town. The air is cool and the bells toll gently through the misty morning. Monks move in silence, their habits brushing softly against the stone floors. You might think such a place would be severe, even grim. But here, of all places, cleanliness was taken seriously. Not because of vanity, but because of ritual. Monastic life was deeply ordered. Every day held its rhythm, prayer, work, meals, contemplation. And woven into this rhythm was the cleansing of hands, of faces, of hearts. Before prayer, monks washed. Before meals, they washed again. Some monasteries had entire rooms dedicated to hand washing, long stone troughs fed by cold clear water with towels folded neatly nearby. Cleanliness here was a preparation, a quieting of the self before encountering the divine. But step outside those cloisters and the picture changes slightly, though not entirely. Among everyday folk, cleanliness was shaped not only by religious tradition, but by the seasons, by customs and by necessity. Many people believed that too much bathing could actually weaken the body, opening the pores and letting sickness creep in. And so, while washing the hands and face was a daily ritual, full-body baths were often reserved for special times before a feast, after childbirth, or on holy days. But even then, the act was not just physical. It was layered with meaning. Let's pause for a moment and imagine a young woman preparing for Easter. The house is busy, swept clean of winter's dust. She boils water on the hearth, carefully adding dried rosemary and mint, herbs known for their healing, their fragrance, and perhaps their spiritual power. She pours this into a basin and with a cloth begins to bathe, not just to be clean, but to be new, to greet the holy day with freshness, both outer and inner. In this way, bathing was a kind of transformation. We see this mirrored in religious texts and practices. In Christianity, baptism, a washing in water, marked the beginning of spiritual life. And so water was not just a tool, it was sacred. It had the power to purify, to protect, and to connect one to something larger. This belief extended to the daily rituals too. Children were taught to wash their hands in the morning, not just to remove sleep's dust, but to ready themselves for the day. At night they washed again, to cleanse the sins of the day and to sleep in peace. Water, even in its simplicity, was deeply symbolic. And yet, this belief came with contradictions. Some church leaders, especially in the early Middle Ages, warned against excessive concern with the body. Vanity, they feared, was a sin. And in times of plague or famine, public bathhouses were even seen as suspect, places where temptation and disease mingled. But others believed the opposite, that a clean body honored God, that caring for oneself was a form of quiet reverence. And so, medieval people navigated these waters, both literally and metaphorically, with care. They washed what they could, when they could. They anointed their heads with oil on special days. They rubbed their feet with vinegar after long walks. They fasted, prayed, and washed as acts of devotion. This blending of the spiritual and the physical created a unique view of hygiene, one not centered on germs or science, which were still centuries away, but on order, balance, and the rhythms of life. Take, for example, the calendar. The medieval year was divided not just by months but by feast days, fast days, and saints' days, and with each came certain customs. Before Lent, many people bathed. Before weddings, bathhouses did brisk business. Before a journey, a quick wash might be done, to ask for protection, to feel right. Cleanliness was seasonal, not daily. Ritual, not routine, and always there were herbs. In a time before modern perfumes or antiseptics, nature offered her own solutions. Lavender was prized for its calming scent. Sage, thyme, and marjoram were used to rub on the skin. Rosewater, when available, was seen as luxurious, a scent that carried the weight of beauty and holiness. Even the poorest homes might keep dried herbs above the hearth, ready to be crumbled into wash water or tucked into linen. These simple acts were not just practical. They were comforting, anchoring, because in a world that was often uncertain, where illness came quickly and life could change with the weather, the small act of washing one's face, of lighting a fragrant candle, of rinsing hands in warm water, these were gestures of control, of hope. And so, we find that the medieval mindset around hygiene was not ignorant, not careless, but deeply layered, thoughtful, sometimes cautious, sometimes reverent. It was a mindset that said, I am part of something larger, and so I must be clean, not just in body, but in heart. As you drift now, you might imagine yourself in that quiet monastery again, the stone cool underfoot, the scent of mint and beeswax in the air, a simple basin of water before you, the hush of evening prayers murmured gently in the distance. You lift the water to your face. It is cool, calming, and you understand, not just with the mind, but with the whole being, why they believed as they did. As our gentle walk through the past continues, we leave behind the lofty arches of monasteries and the spiritual poetry of ritual cleanliness. Now, we step into the quieter corners of daily life, kitchens warmed by low fires, narrow wooden doorways leading to busy market streets, and humble bedrooms where the window shutters creak softly in the wind. Here, in the rhythms of the everyday, we find the small acts of cleanliness that made up much of medieval hygiene. The washing of hands, the dabbing of faces, the tending of feet after a long day on dusty roads. Though full-body bathing was not a daily custom for most, daily washing absolutely was, and it held more importance than we might expect. Let's begin at dawn. A cock crows faintly in the Wayham distance. The air is still cool, perhaps even crisp, and sunlight is only just beginning to slant through the cracks in the shutters. A woman stirs from her straw mattress, bundled in linen and wool. She yawns, stretches, and rises. Before she eats, before she speaks more than a whisper, she walks over to a small wooden basin. She pours a little water from a jug, cold from the night, and dips in a cloth. Carefully, she wipes her face, her neck, the nape of her neck. Then her hands, fingers, palms, wrists. This water isn't wasted. It's saved for the next person, perhaps strained through a cloth to remove any debris, or used to rinse out the mouth. These morning ablutions were not luxurious, but they were habitual. The face and hands were considered the parts most exposed to others, and thus most in need of care. They were also the areas most likely to be marked by the day's labor, meals, or mishaps. Children learned to wash their faces from a young age, not only for hygiene's sake, but as a gesture of waking, person of beginning the day alert and ready. Some would splash their eyes with cold water to clear the sleep. Others might rub their skin gently with linen or wool, exfoliating in the most modest way. And of course, the hands. If there is one thing that medieval people washed often, it was their hands. Before meals, guests were offered water to wash, a ritual as much as a necessity. In noble households, a servant might bring around a basin and pitcher, pouring water scented with herbs over the hands of each person. A towel, often finely embroidered, would be held out. This moment was often accompanied by quiet words, a murmur of welcome, or even a prayer of gratitude. In humbler homes, the process was simpler but still respected. A shared basin, a rag kept clean for the purpose, a small pitcher of water warmed by the hearth. At market stalls, traders often kept cloths to wipe their hands. Smiths and butchers, covered in the traces of their trade, rinsed frequently, not necessarily out of medical concern, but to keep tools and transactions clean. Even after meals, hand washing was common. The greasy traces of meats, oils, or thick stews lingered, and in a world where napkins were rare and soap was precious, water and cloth served as the final step of the meal. Interestingly, medieval hand washing also carried a certain social and moral weight. To have clean hands was to show respect for your host, your food, and your company. Dirty hands were not only unpleasant, they were potentially disrespectful. In some writings, the metaphor of clean hands was used as a sign of inner purity, just as a clean face might symbolize honesty or innocence. This extended even into public events. At feasts, processions, and church gatherings, the act of hand washing became communal, part of the ceremony, part of the performance. In royal courts, elaborate basins of silver or gold were brought forth, and rosewater poured in graceful spirals across noble palms. Towels were folded like fans, embroidered with crests, and handled by designated servants. But even among peasants, hand washing had its place. At the end of a workday, a woman might return from the fields and wash her hands before kneading dough. A man might rinse the dust from his fingers before handling tools inside the home. And then there is the face. Though mirrors were rare and often small, polished metal or bits of imported glass, people still took care of their appearance. Washing the face each morning and evening was not only refreshing, but also a way of waking and winding down. It might be done with cold water, or with water infused with herbs, rosemary, thyme, rose petals, even a little vinegar for cleansing. Some people believed certain herbs could soften the skin, clear the eyes, or prevent blemishes. Recipes survive that suggest wiping the face with linen dipped in warm milk, or washing with water that had held crushed fennel seeds overnight. The goals were modest: clarity, freshness, a pleasant scent. Makeup was rare, but natural beauty was quietly pursued. Bright eyes, clean skin, a sweet breath. Women sometimes chewed parsley or anise seeds to freshen their mouths. Men rubbed rosemary into their beards or rinsed with wine-based herbal tonics. These were gentle, homemade acts of self-care, long before such a phrase existed. There was also a curious, consistent concern for the nose and ears. Manuals from the time suggest that people were advised to clean the inside of the nose gently with a cloth and to wash the outer ears with warm water. Why? Because these were seen as gateways, openings where bad air or unclean spirits might enter. Keeping them clean was both hygienic and protective. And what of feet? After a day in simple leather shoes or barefoot in fields, feet were often sore, dirty, and tired. Many people bathed their feet at night, a soothing act. The water might be warmed, scented with mint or sage. Calluses were gently rubbed, and nails cleaned with small knives. It was a moment of comfort, of transition from day to rest. So while medieval people may not have bathed daily, they still found moments to care for their bodies, slowly, intentionally, and with what they had. Washing, then, was not about scrubbing everything clean, but about attention, a kind of mindful maintenance rooted in habit and humility. And as you lie back now, perhaps you feel your own hands, warm under the blanket. Perhaps your face still carries the gentle coolness of your evening routine. You've done, in your own modern way, what they did long ago, prepared yourself for rest, cared for your body, honored the day, and tomorrow, when you wake, you'll do it again, as they did, with a small basin, a clean cloth, and a quiet beginning. Imagine, if you will, the scent of warm water mingled with crushed herbs, the echo of laughter muffled behind timber walls, A low hum of voices, water sloshing gently, and the soft clatter of wooden sandals on wet stone. Tonight, we enter a place, long forgotten by many modern minds, the medieval bathhouse. While today we often imagine medieval people as dirty, unwashed, or somehow uninterested in bathing, this image is far from complete. In truth, the Middle Ages held a deep appreciation for the comfort, the health, and even the pleasure of bathing. Let us begin with a simple fact. Communal bathing was common. In towns across Europe, from Paris to Prague, from Florence to York, bathhouses stood at the heart of many neighborhoods. These weren't luxurious spas for the elite, though the wealthy had their own bathing rituals too. They were places for all sorts of people, merchants and bakers, widows and scribes, travelers and tailors, and all might find their way to the bathhouse on a chilly afternoon. Bathhouses came in many forms. Some were attached to monasteries or hospitals. Others were private businesses, sometimes run by families for generations. A few were little more than heated tubs in wooden sheds. Others were elaborate complexes with separate rooms for hot and cold-soaking changing areas and even small gardens for resting afterward. One might walk into a bathhouse and be greeted by warm, damp air and the soft flicker of candlelight. A friendly attendant might offer a bucket of hot water drawn from a copper pot over the fire. The air would smell of lavender, rosemary, and sometimes, if it was a particularly good day, fresh rose petals. People came to soak, to scrub, and to socialize. This was not a rushed affair. A typical bathing session might last hours. First, you would undress, sometimes modestly, sometimes not, depending on the local customs. You'd sit in the warm water, letting the heat soothe your muscles. Friends chatted, sang songs, even played games. It wasn't unusual for someone to bring a small meal or a jug of wine. Of course, privacy varied. In some cities, bathhouses were mixed gender. In others, strict rules separated men and women by time of day or by day of the week. The church often frowned upon the more indulgent establishments, especially those where morality blurred like steam on a window. But even among these, many were respectable, even cherished as places of health and healing, because bathing wasn't just for pleasure. It was believed to be essential for health. Hot water opened the pores, encouraged sweating, and was thought to drive out illness. Physicians of the day wrote at length about the best times to bathe, not too soon after eating, what herbs to add for different ailments, mint for the nerves, thyme for the skin, and how long to remain in the water until your breath became slow and your heart calm. Some even believed that regular bathing could balance the humors, the four bodily fluids thought to govern health: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. There were, however, times of caution. During certain plagues or outbreaks, bathhouses were closed. People feared that the warmth of the water might open the body too much, making it vulnerable to disease. In those times, dry washing or limited personal bathing replaced the communal soak. But when the danger passed, the bathhouses filled again, and not just with the poor or the common folk. Nobility bathed too, often in private, sometimes with great ceremony. In castle chambers, large wooden tubs were brought forth, sometimes lined with linen for comfort. Servants would carry hot water, bucket after bucket, until the tub was full. Scented herbs or milk might be added. A screen was placed for privacy. Candles were lit. A lady might sit for an hour, sipping warm wine, chatting with her maid, or simply enjoying the heat. Even kings bathed. King Louis IX of France was known to bathe regularly, sometimes twice a week, quite often by medieval standards. Queen Eleanor of Aquitaine traveled with her own bathing tent, complete with bronze tub and perfumed oils. In the East, where Islamic traditions placed a strong emphasis on cleanliness, public hammams, steam baths, were integral to daily life, blending hygiene with spirituality and community. In medieval Japan, meanwhile, communal bathing had long been established as a vital part of culture, and travelers from Europe often remarked with curiosity, and sometimes admiration, at how clean and frequent the bathing was there. But back in the European West, what did people actually use to wash? Soap, of course, but not the brightly colored, fragrant bars we know today. Medieval soap was often made from animal fat and lye, sometimes mixed with herbs or ashes. It was coarse but effective. For those who could afford it, imported soap from the Muslim world, made with olive oil and scented with lemon or laurel, was a luxury. Scrubbing was done with cloths or soft brushes, sometimes even with coarse salt, and when no soap was available, people used herbs, vinegar, or wine. A rinse with warm rosemary water might leave the skin feeling soft and refreshed. A little vinegar mixed with rose water served as both cleanser and perfume. Bathing then was not merely about removing dirt. It was about renewal, and for many, it was a sacred time, a time for rest, a time for laughter, a time for healing. Can you picture it now? A small bathhouse, the walls steamed, the windows fogged, wooden benches worn smooth by use, a pot of mint tea sitting on a ledge, someone singing quietly in the next room, two old friends playing dice near the fire, a young mother washing her child's hair gently. There is something timeless in this. Because even today, when you slip into a hot bath at the end of a long day, or step into a warm shower, you are doing what countless others have done before you. Taking a moment, letting the water carry away not just the dust of the day but the weight of it. And so tonight, as you drift towards sleep, imagine the warmth of that bathhouse around you. Imagine the sound of water lapping against wood, the scent of thyme, the soft light of candles dancing on stone. You are not far from them, really, those medieval bathers. You are simply one of many, floating gently through time. As we drift deeper into our nighttime walk through the textures of the past, we now arrive at a most curious corner of the medieval world. A place where artisans stirred pots over open fires, where oils and ashes were transformed by slow hands into bars of usefulness and luxury alike. Tonight we explore the quiet magic of medieval soap and scents. For all the scrubbing, soaking, and rinsing we've explored so far, you may have wondered, what did people use to actually get clean? In today's world, the answer is instant. Shelves lined with lavender-infused body washes, eucalyptus-scented bars, foaming cleansers in every color. But in the Middle Ages, the answer was slower, simpler, and often handmade. Let's begin with soap, or rather with many kinds of soap. The word soap in medieval times referred to a variety of substances, from coarse cleansing pastes to hard molded bars. The most common soaps in Europe were made from animal fat and lye, the lye itself usually derived from the ashes of burned wood. The process was laborious and not without danger. Lye, caustic and potent, had to be handled carefully. It stung the skin, burned the eyes, and could ruin a batch if not measured properly. Soap makers, often women working in the backyards of their homes, would slowly boil fats and lye in great pots, stirring for hours with thick wooden paddles. The scent was strong, not always pleasant. Once cooled and set, the soap was cut into blocks and stored for drying. This plain soap was the everyday cleanser, used to scrub hands, wash clothing, even clean wooden floors and utensils. It smelled of smoke and tallow, and though it lacked elegance, it worked. But in cities like Marseille, Aleppo, and Damascus, a finer kind of soap was taking shape. Here, artisans used olive oil as the base. The result was gentler, smoother, and subtly scented. These soaps were often mixed with herbs, flowers, or citrus peel, and became prized throughout Europe. They were traded across the Mediterranean, wrapped in cloth or waxed paper, carried by merchants into noble households and monasteries alike. To receive a bar of scented soap, perhaps lemon and bay leaf or rose and cinnamon, was a sign of grace and refinement. For those who could not afford such luxury, alternatives abounded. Some people used ashes mixed with water to make a cleansing paste. Others washed with sand or fine clay, particularly in areas where soap was rare or expensive. These substances, though coarse, helped to exfoliate the skin and remove oils. And then there were herbs, the quiet heroes of medieval cleanliness. Nearly every home had a small garden, or at least a few pots of herbs near the kitchen door. Not just for flavoring food, but for cleansing the body. Rosemary, for example, was a favorite. Its crisp, piney scent refreshed the skin and helped mask less pleasant smells. Boiled in water, rosemary created a fragrant rinse, used for hair, for hands, and even to wipe down wooden furniture. Mint, too, was cherished, both for washing and for sweetening the breath. People chewed mint leaves after meals, rubbed their gums with them, or steeped them in vinegar to make an all-purpose tonic. Lavender was treasured especially by the upper classes. Tucked into linens, hung above the bed, added to bathwater. Its floral scent symbolized purity, and its oils were believed to calm the nerves. Other plants played their parts: thyme for the skin, sage for cleansing, chamomile for calming baths. In a time before synthetic perfume, nature provided everything, and scent, like cleanliness itself, was not a vanity, but a sign of care. The idea of scented hygiene, smelling fresh and pleasant, carried deep social meaning. A well-scented person was considered orderly, respectful, and even trustworthy. Bad smells, on the other hand, were linked to moral decay, sin, or disease. And so the pursuit of fragrance became part of daily life. People would press herbs into their clothing. Some stitched small pouches, called pomanders, filled with crushed flowers and spices, and wore them around the neck or wrist. Others carried dried orange peels or cloves in their pockets. In some cities, vendors sold scented waters on the street: rose water, violet water, even vinegar infused with cinnamon or nutmeg. These were dabbed on the hands or face or sprinkled in the home. A wealthy lady might have a collection of such bottles, displayed proudly beside her mirror. Even monks and nuns, though devoted to humility, kept simple vials of scented oil, often for healing, but sometimes quietly for personal use. Let us pause for a moment here and imagine such a scene: a stone cottage, a basin of warm water resting near the hearth, a sprig of mint freshly plucked steeping slowly within. A woman dips a cloth into the fragrant water, wrings it gently, and presses it to her cheeks, her neck, her hands. The scent is subtle, familiar. Her face relaxes. This moment is not grand, not public, but it is care, it is hygiene, it is peace. There were even recipes, passed down in quiet kitchens, scrawled in the margins of herbals, for more elaborate concoctions. A vinegar wash made with rose petals, bay leaves, cloves, and cinnamon. A hair rinse of sage and apple, cider. A facial steam using elderflower and thyme. Each recipe told a story of someone tending to themselves or another. A child sick with fever, a husband home from the fields, a neighbor in mourning. Cleanliness, after all, was not just for the self. It was for the community, a sign of respect to others, a quiet gift. And so, the tools of cleanliness, simple though they were, became daily companions. A rag, a bar of soap, a bowl of water, a sprig of rosemary, a towel drying in the sun. Today our shelves may gleam with plastic and labels, but the idea remains the same: to cleanse not only the body but the spirit, to feel new, to feel ready. As you settle now, wrapped in your own quiet night, think of the soft hands that once stirred soap over flame. Think of the scent of mint drifting through an open window. Think of a warm cloth pressed gently to a sleeping child's forehead. These were their tools, their ways. And though centuries lie between us, they are not so far. Let us now lift our gaze gently upward, from the hands and the feet, from scented water basins and herb-filled bathhouses. We turn our attention to one of the most expressive, most cherished, and perhaps most carefully tended parts of the medieval body: the head, and especially the hair. Hair in the Middle Ages was not just a matter of beauty. It was a canvas for personal identity, a symbol of health and order, a marker of class, modesty, or rebellion, depending on how it was kept, how it was covered, and how it was cleaned. And it was also a source of concern. Because for all the soft scents and soothing rinses we've explored, hair was one of the more challenging parts of the body to keep clean in a time without shampoos, conditioners, or daily hot water. But medieval people, in their own gentle, patient ways, found solutions. Let's begin with the act of washing the hair itself. Full hair washing was not done every day, or even every week, for most people. Water, especially warm water, was precious, and hair washing was a time-consuming process. Water had to be heated, herbs prepared, cloths gathered. Long hair, especially on women, required care in drying and brushing, and so many people washed their hair seasonally or before important events, festivals, weddings, religious celebrations, or court appearances. But washing in this context did not always mean soaping the scalp from root to tip. More often, hair was cleaned with herbal rinses, vinegar soaks, or dusting powders, all meant to refresh, degrease, and perfume the head rather than scrub it. A typical hair cleaning ritual might begin with combing. Wooden or bone combs were used daily, sometimes multiple times a day. These combs had both wide and fine teeth and were carefully carved to remove tangles, smooth hair, and, importantly, capture lice. Yes, lice were a common and unwelcome visitor in medieval Europe, and combing was one of the primary defenses against them. Parents combed their children's hair patiently by firelight. Servants combed the hair of their masters. Even nuns, who kept their hair mostly covered, combed regularly as an act of bodily stewardship. Combs themselves were personal, objects treasured, cleaned, and sometimes even blessed. After combing came the rinse. Vinegar diluted with water was commonly used, especially apple cider vinegar, which helped cut through oils and left a slight shine. Herbs were added for scent and care, chamomile to soften, rosemary to stimulate, nettle to strengthen. Some households kept dried herbs stored just for this purpose. A pot would be filled with warm water, the herbs steeped like tea, and the resulting infusion poured slowly over the hair, often while sitting beside the hearth. The water would run down into a basin, collected for further use, perhaps for rinsing clothes or cleaning feet later. For those who did not wash often, powders were an alternative. Made from crushed flowers, dried clay, ground iris root, or even chalk, these powders were sprinkled onto the scalp and brushed through the hair. They helped absorb oil, reduce odor, and leave a faint, pleasant scent. After brushing, the hair would be carefully braided or pinned, and for women especially, the next step was covering. Most medieval women, particularly in Christian Europe, covered their hair in public after marriage. This could be with a simple kerchief, a wimple, or a finely woven veil. The head covering was not only a sign of modesty, it was also practical, helping to protect the hair from dust, sun, and the ever-present lice. But underneath the layers, hair was often long and well-tended. Braiding was popular, not only to keep hair tidy but to prevent tangling. In some regions, women oiled their hair with mixtures of olive oil and lavender, or combed through rose water to add sheen. Hair was brushed regularly, a soothing ritual at the end of the day, and among the nobility, hair became a kind of art. Ladies-in-waiting might spend hours styling the hair of a noblewoman, braids twisted into crowns, curls shaped and pinned. Sometimes the hair was lightened with lye or sunlight, an early form of bleaching. This was fashionable, though not always safe, and a sign of wealth, as only those who did not labor in the fields could afford to maintain such appearances. Men, too, paid attention to their hair, though customs varied. In some regions, shorter hair was considered virtuous. In others, shoulder-length hair was a sign of status. Beards came in and out of fashion, depending on the century and the court. Monks shaved their heads into tonsures, circles of bare skin surrounded by a ring of hair, symbolizing humility and devotion. And like women, men used combs and scented oils. A knight might apply rosemary oil before a feast, or rinse his hair in cold mint water after training. Kings and scholars alike kept ivory combs in their chambers, sometimes inscribed with prayers or family crests. But perhaps most touching of all were the intimate hair rituals shared between people. A mother brushing her daughter's hair by the fire, a wife carefully removing straw from her husband's curls after a long day in the fields, a servant washing a lady's hair on her wedding day, gently untangling nerves along with knots. Hair care in this way was not simply about hygiene. It was about comfort, identity, and connection. It was the scent of rosemary rising from a warm cloth, the gentle scratch of a wooden comb, the quiet sigh of relief as braids were loosened for the night, the shared space of touch, patience, and trust. So as you lie back now, your head resting softly on your pillow, imagine those same sensations. A warm rinse along your scalp, the weight of your hair drying in the evening air, the hush of someone combing through it, slowly, carefully, like a lullaby in motion. Above the shoulders there was care, there was attention, there was beauty, humble, fragrant, and enduring. And still tonight, that tenderness remains. Let us settle now, quietly and curiously, into another overlooked corner of medieval life. We've wandered through baths and basins, through herb gardens and hair rinses. Now we turn inward, to the mouth, the teeth, the breath, that most intimate space where health, scent, and speech meet. Oral hygiene in the Middle Ages was not simply about brushing and flossing. Those concepts, at least in the form we know today, did not yet exist. But that does not mean that people ignored the care of their teeth and breath. Quite the opposite. While they lacked modern tools, medieval people were often acutely aware of their mouths, of the way they smelled, the way they tasted, the way they felt. A painful tooth, after all, was no small matter in a world without anesthetic. And bad breath was not just unpleasant, it was a social signal, a sign that something might be amiss in the body or the soul. Let us begin, as always, with the simplest acts. Tooth cleaning. The medieval toothbrush, as we know it, did not exist. But the act of cleaning the teeth was practiced with a variety of tools and materials, many of them surprisingly effective. Some people used twigs, carefully chosen from trees like walnut, ash, or hazel, to rub along the teeth and gums. The end of the twig would be chewed gently to fray it, creating a small brush-like tip. This was then used to scrape and clean, often dipped in vinegar or wine first. Others wrapped coarse cloth around a finger and rubbed the teeth with a mixture of salt and sage, or even crushed charcoal, which, while rough, acted as a sort of primitive abrasive, much like modern toothpaste grit. Herbal pastes were also known. Recipes survive that suggest mixing ground cloves, mint, and salt with a little honey or vinegar. The result would be rubbed onto the teeth and gums, left for a few moments, then rinsed with wine or water. Wine itself, particularly the strong, red and spiced varieties, was sometimes swished in the mouth as a cleanser. Not so unlike today's mouthwash, though perhaps a bit more cheerful in spirit. Toothpicks, too, were common, made from wood, bone, or even precious metals among the wealthy. These tiny tools were used to remove food stuck between the teeth. It was not uncommon for a nobleman to carry a toothpick in his pouch or pocket, especially before a public feast. In fact, etiquette manuals from the later Middle Ages sometimes warned against overusing the toothpick at the table, not because it was unsanitary, but because it was considered uncouth to clean your teeth too obviously in front of others. And what of bad breath? The medieval world had many ideas on this. The most common remedy was chewing herbs. Mint, parsley, aniseed, fennel, all were believed to freshen the breath and aid digestion. Guests at a banquet might be offered sprigs of parsley after the main course, not as decoration, but as a polite gesture for cleansing the mouth. Cloves were another favorite, chewed for their warming, aromatic qualities. Cinnamon bark, licorice root, and cardamom, when available, served similar purposes. These were prized imports often found in apothecaries or among a merchant's more treasured stores. Some more elaborate breath fresheners included small balls of sugar mixed with spices, a kind of early mint. Wealthy ladies might carry these, in sachets tied at the wrist, discreetly popping one into the mouth between conversations. Even vinegar rinses had their place. A mixture of vinegar, salt, and rosemary was recommended by some herbalists as a mouthwash to combat odor and purify the breath, though it may have stung more than it soothed. In monasteries, monks were encouraged to rinse their mouths regularly, especially before singing in choir. Clear speech, after all, was a matter of reverence, and when dental pain struck, as it inevitably did, remedies ranged from the curious to the compassionate. a clove pressed against an aching tooth, a poultice made of crushed garlic and wine, a compress soaked in warm ale and thyme applied to the jaw. Some believed that placing a frog on the cheek would draw out the pain. Others recited prayers to Saint Apollonia, the patron saint of toothache. Sufferers, clutching her icon while rocking gently in pain. In more serious cases, a tooth might be pulled, not without risk, not without fear. Barber surgeons who cut hair and cut flesh alike often performed such extractions. The tools were crude, the pain intense, but sometimes there was no other choice. And yet, despite all this, the state of medieval teeth may surprise you. Archaeological studies of medieval skeletons show that many people had remarkably healthy teeth, especially when compared to later centuries. Why? Because sugar, that great enemy of enamel, was rare. Honey was used in moderation, and refined sugar was an exotic, expensive treat, often reserved for royalty. Bread was made from coarse stone-ground flour, and the diet, though heavy on oinon, grains and dairy, lacked the sticky sweetness that now clings to modern mouths. This meant fewer cavities, stronger teeth, and interestingly, fewer crooked smiles, as softer modern diets have changed the shape of our jaws over time. Of course, not all was perfect. There were still infections, abscesses, gum disease. But the overall picture is not one of rotting mouths and terrible breath. It is instead one of people who tried wine with herbs, with rinses, with gentle effort, to care for something delicate. And as we close this soft chapter of our nighttime wandering, let us imagine, just for a moment, the quiet intimacy of such care. A young man chewing a mint leaf before meeting his betrothed, a mother teaching her child how to rinse with warm water and salt, a monk whispering prayers while pressing a clove to his aching jaw, a merchant offering a guest a sprig of rosemary after a shared meal. These were the small, fragrant rituals of the mouth, not flashy, not scientific, but human, thoughtful, kind. So tonight, as you breathe softly in the dark, perhaps you catch the faint memory of mint, the sweet cool of anise, the soothing warmth of a rinse after a long day. And you know, as they knew, that the care of the mouth was never just about the teeth. It was about the breath, the words, the closeness between souls. And that, too, deserves to be clean. Now that we've bathed, brushed, and breathed in the scents of rosemary and mint, it's time to turn our gaze to something less often romanticized, but equally essential in the long story of medieval cleanliness. Tonight, we fold into the fabric of daily life, quite literally, and explore how people of the Middle Ages kept their clothing clean. Because even in a world without washing machines, stain removers, or bright plastic bottles of detergent, people still desired fresh linen, crisp sleeves, and garments free from the marks of labor and time. Let's begin not with castles or grand estates, but in a small village by a winding river. The air is cool. Birds rustle in the hedgerow, and down by the water's edge, two women kneel at wooden boards, sleeves rolled high, skirts tucked back. They chatter softly as they work, lifting, scrubbing, rinsing. Cloth slaps wetly against the flat stones. A child nearby stomps joyfully in the shallows, scattering ducks. This was a communal sight, one repeated in countless places across medieval Europe. Laundry was both chore and social act, a rhythm of lifting, wringing, beating, and drying. A moment of connection, because even without electricity, the laundry needed doing. Most medieval people owned few garments, especially those of the lower classes. A peasant might have a single woolen tunic and perhaps 2 or 3 linen undershirts or shifts. Underclothes were made of linen, which was prized for its softness, breathability, and, most importantly, its washability. Unlike outer garments made from heavy wool, linen could be laundered frequently, and it was. This was the layer worn, next to the skin, absorbing sweat and oils, keeping the outer clothing somewhat cleaner. And so, the care of linen was crucial. Laundry days, often aligned with weather and work cycles, began early. Water was fetched, or carried to the river or stream. Soap, if available, was prepared. This might be lye soap, made at home from ash and fat, or a mixture of wood ash and water, forming a simple but effective alkaline solution. Sometimes urine was used. Known as chamber lye, aged urine was valued for its ammonia content and served as a powerful stain remover and degreaser. It might make modern noses wrinkle, but in the Middle Ages, it was practical and widely used. Clothes were soaked, scrubbed on wooden boards or smooth stones, then pounded with wooden paddles to help break up dirt and soften fibers. Afterward, garments were rinsed, often multiple times, then wrung out and laid across bushes, flat stones, or wooden frames to dry. In summer, the sun helped bleach the fabric. In winter, drying took longer, and garments were sometimes hung indoors near the hearth. To freshen clothes further, they were often sprinkled with herbs before storage. Lavender, mint, and wormwood were favorites, both for their scents and for their ability to repel moths and lice. And for special garments, there were starching and whitening techniques. Medieval manuals describe boiling white cloth with a mix of soap and chalk to enhance brightness. Starch made from wheat or rice could be applied to collars or cuffs, then dried and pressed flat with heavy stones or heated irons. Simple tools made of metal, or even smoothed stone, placed near the fire. The process was long, the results modest. But for feasts or religious ceremonies, or when visiting a neighboring town, people took pride in presenting themselves well. Clean linen was a quiet kind of wealth, a sign of order, discipline, and dignity. But not everyone washed at the river. In the towns and wealthier households, laundresses, often hired women or servants, handled the task. They hauled water, tended fires, stirred great cauldrons of soap and cloth. The laundry room, if a house had one, was hot, damp, and filled with the scent of lye and steam. Even queens had to consider laundry. Queen Elizabeth of York, mother to Henry VIII, once recorded paying her laundress a tidy sum for maintaining her linens and clothing. Detailed inventories from noble households show careful tracking of each item of fabric, its condition, and the frequency of its washing. And yes, mistakes were made. Colors bled, wool shrank, delicate seams gave way under too much wringing. But laundresses learned to mend, patch, and press with remarkable skill. A well-kept piece of linen might last for years. Curiously, while linen was washed often, wool was not. Wool garments, cloaks, tunics, hoods, were brushed, shaken out, and spot cleaned. If they became very dirty, they might be aired outside, or lightly rinsed with vinegar and water. But full washing was rare, as wool, when wet, could felt, shrink, and lose its shape. Instead, layers of linen protected the wool. And cleanliness, like so much else in the Middle Ages, was layered, inner freshness protecting outer form. And then, there were the accessories. Hats, scarves, gloves, and shoes all required their own care. Leather was wiped with cloths soaked in oil. Woolen caps were brushed and dusted. And shoes, sometimes stuffed with straw for comfort, were cleaned of mud and manure with sticks or knives, then left to dry by the fire. Clothing in all its forms was not disposable. It was valued, mended, handed down. A dress might be turned inside out to hide stains. A tunic might be patched with a square of different fabric, not out of style but necessity. And the act of mending was itself a kind of care. So as we sit here now in the stillness of the night, you might picture it. A line of white shifts dancing in the breeze. A woman brushing lint from her husband's cloak. A child wrapping a freshly laundered scarf around their neck, warm from the fire. The scent of lavender lingering in a chest of folded cloth. These small scenes, so quiet, so domestic, speak to a truth often forgotten, that medieval people, like us, found comfort in clean clothes, in soft fabric against the skin, in the ritual of freshening, folding, and storing. And perhaps tonight, as you nestle under your own covers, you feel a similar gratitude for clean sheets, for worn, beloved pajamas, for the quiet rhythm of laundry day, that ancient, humble act of making things feel new again. Even without machines, they knew the feeling. And now, so do you. And now, with no rush, with nothing but curiosity and calm, we arrive at one of the most quietly essential and often quietly avoided aspects of medieval life, the humble act of answering nature's call. Yes, tonight we step softly into the world of medieval toilets, privies, and all the little ways that people 1,000 years ago managed their most human moments. It's not a glamorous subject. There are no tapestries devoted to it, no ballads sung about privies. But this topic, handled gently and with a sense of ease, reveals something deeply grounding. Because every king, every monk, every merchant and milkmaid, every person had to go, and how they went. Well, that tells us a great deal. Let's begin with the most common solution, the privy. In rural areas and smaller towns, the privy was often a simple wooden structure set apart from the main dwelling, for obvious reasons. A small hut, open to the wind, perhaps with a slanted roof and a single wooden seat over a pit. Sometimes it was nothing more than a hole in the ground surrounded by a screen of woven branches. These privies were modest, utilitarian, and, depending on the season, either stiflingly warm or bitingly cold. They were, however, often well placed. Downwind. Near a garden but not too near. Near a stream but never upstream from drinking water. People understood in a practical way the importance of keeping waste away from food and water, even if they couldn't yet explain germs. Chamber pots, meanwhile, were used indoors. These were small pots, usually made of ceramic, wood, or metal, kept under the bed or behind a curtain. Used during the night or in bad weather, they offered a bit of comfort and privacy. In the morning, the pot would be emptied, sometimes out a window, not ideal, but often into a pit, a cesspool, or a designated area outside the home. In cities, waste disposal became a more complex affair. In medieval London, for example, many homes had small latrines built into the yard, or in multi-story houses, even extended outward from upper floors, built over narrow channels that carried waste away. These guardrobes, as they were called, were vertical shafts with a seat above, usually lined with stone or wood. Some castles had guardrobes built directly into the outer walls, suspended over moats or chutes that led down to rivers below. If you ever wondered why castle walls sometimes have small projecting stone rooms with slits, well, now you know. It was practical, and at times a bit breezy, but waste didn't always disappear as easily as a flowing river might suggest. Cesspits, deep holes dug to collect human waste, were common in towns. These had to be emptied periodically, a job performed by people known as gong farmers. These brave souls worked mostly at night, collecting the contents of cesspits, latrines, and privies, and carting them out of the city, usually to be used as fertilizer in nearby fields. The smell? Unspeakable. The pay? Better than average. It was dangerous work, both socially and physically, but essential. And what about toilet paper? Well, they didn't have Charmin. Instead, medieval people used whatever was at hand: rags, leaves, moss, even handfuls of hay. In wealthier homes, soft wool or linen scraps might be reserved for this purpose. In monasteries, smooth stones or pieces of broken pottery were sometimes used, carefully washed and reused. In Islamic cultures of the time, water for cleansing was more common, part of a broader tradition of hygiene rooted in religious practice. In fact, across many regions, water was valued for purification, not just physical but spiritual. After relieving oneself, washing hands was considered proper and important. In some religious contexts, it was mandatory. The link between cleanliness and morality ran strong. Monasteries and convents often had carefully built latrines, with drainage systems that, while simple, showed an understanding of sanitation. Waste flowed away from the living quarters through stone channels, sometimes even through small gardens where its, shall we say, fertilizing potential could be quietly put to use. And yes, even castles, grand and stone-cold though they were, had toilets. In the great keeps of England and France, garderobes were tucked into thick walls accessible from bedrooms or halls. These were narrow, steep, and often led down to small enclosed pits or even into the base of towers. In winter, they were freezing. In summer, less than fragrant. But they served their purpose. Interestingly, the word garderobe, originally, referred to a place to guard one's robes. Clothing was sometimes hung in these small toilet rooms, as it was believed the strong smells would repel lice and moths. Whether or not that worked is another story. Public toilets, too, existed, especially in large cities like Rome, later Islamic Cordoba, or certain parts of Paris and London. These were communal and often built near rivers or overflowing water. They were not glamorous, but they were functional and frequently visited by all classes. And in the streets? Well, not everyone followed the rules. Laws were passed again and again to stop people from emptying chamber pots into the street. In many towns, there were signs warning against public urination. Fines were issued. People complained. But still, it happened. And perhaps that is the most human part of this whole story, the mixture of intention and reality, of rules and improvisation. Because the truth is, medieval people did what they could. They built privies, dug cesspits, employed night soil men, hung herbs to mask the scent, emptied chamber pots with care, or sometimes with none. They faced the same challenge we all face: how to manage something necessary, natural, and not always pleasant. And they did it, with creativity, with effort, and sometimes even with humor. So tonight, as you lie back in modern comfort, you might be surprised to find a kind of appreciation, not for the stink, but for the solutions, for the dignity people sought even in this most humble of human needs. Picture, if you will, a woman lighting a candle to walk to the privy, a monk washing his hands in a stone basin after using the latrine, a father teaching his son how to empty the chamber pot properly. These were quiet rituals, private knowledge passed from one to another, and they remind us that the fabric of daily life, no matter how far back we go, is stitched together by both the extraordinary and the mundane, even, or perhaps especially, by the way we answer nature's call. As we continue our slow, soothing drift through the lesser-known corners of medieval life, it's time we speak of guests that came uninvited, tiny ones, persistent ones, the sort of guests that, once they arrived, rarely packed up and left quietly. Tonight, we meet the lice, the fleas, and all the other invisible yet ever-present inhabitants of the medieval world, and learn just how cleverly, patiently, and sometimes humorously, people tried to manage them. Because for all the scented herbs and lavender baths, the truth is, most people in the Middle Ages shared their lives and their beds with bugs. It's not that they didn't care. On the contrary, people in the medieval world were deeply concerned with parasites. They itched, they scratched, they combed, they cleansed, not always successfully, but often with real effort and ingenuity. Let us begin with the most infamous of them all. Lice, head lice, body lice, and even pubic lice were known nuisances. Their presence wasn't seen as a sign of poor hygiene in the same way we might interpret it today, but it was still bothersome. Children, monks, peasants, even queens dealt with them. Lice did not discriminate, and so people developed tools and routines. The most common was the lice comb, a finely toothed comb made of bone, wood, or ivory. These combs were kept close at hand, often tied to belts or stored in pouches. A mother might sit beside the hearth, gently parting her daughter's hair and running the comb slowly from root to tip. The sound of the comb catching in the hair, the tap of it against the bowl where the lice were dropped, the soft murmur of a lullaby. It was a domestic ritual, full of tenderness. Combing didn't just remove lice, it soothed. For more stubborn infestations, oils and herbal rinses were used. A mixture of vinegar and water was thought to loosen the grip of the lice's tiny feet. Oil, olive or walnut, could be worked through the hair to smother the insects. Afterwards, the hair would be wrapped in cloth and left for a time, then rinsed, combed again, and finally dried by the fire. Monasteries had their own lice management routines. Monks, who often kept short or tonsured hair, were expected to comb regularly, and rules in some orders required that bedding be aired and beaten weekly. In colder monasteries, lice were such common visitors that they became a source of dark humor. Some monks even referred to them as God's little reminders of humility. And then there were the fleas. Fleas were especially common in urban areas where straw-filled mattresses, wooden floors, and the close company of animals created ideal conditions. They spread quickly, bit frequently, and, unlike lice, could jump from host to host with ease. To battle fleas, people employed a variety of methods. Bedding was aired regularly, laid out in sunlight, beaten with sticks, dusted with herbs. Floors were swept, though never quite spotless. Straw in mattresses was replaced as often as possible, sometimes with layers of dried herbs known for their flea-repelling properties. Pennyroyal, wormwood, and sweet flag were all used to line beds, scatter in corners, and even tuck into clothing seams. These herbs were not just fragrant, they were believed to be natural repellents. In wealthier homes, fur garments were particularly prone to infestation. To protect them, ladies might store cloaks with bunches of dried lavender or hang them near smoky fires whose fumes discouraged pests. And if fleas still found their way into bed, well, some took matters into their own hands. Tiny flea traps, shallow bowls filled with sweet oil or warm milk, were placed beneath beds at night. The theory was simple. The warmth or scent would attract the flea, which would then drown in the liquid. Whether it worked or not, it gave people a sense of action, a sense of trying. And sometimes people simply accepted their buggy companions with a weary shrug. Stories survive of noblemen pausing conversations to pluck a flea from their sleeve, of servants catching lice mid-meal. Even a famous bishop once joked in a sermon that the itch of lice was proof that one was still alive and not yet a saint. But humor wasn't the only defense. Cleanliness rituals, as we've seen, mattered greatly. Clothes were brushed daily, especially woolens. Linen undergarments, which were washable, were changed as often as possible. Hair was bound up, oiled, combed. Beds were stripped, and mattresses beaten. All these tasks, small and repetitive though they were, formed a quiet front line in the war against bugs. Even pets and livestock were part of the story. Cats and dogs carried fleas, of course, as did goats and chickens. Barns and byres were swept, stalls raked, and animals sometimes washed or dusted with ashes. In wealthier estates, hawks kept as pets or hunting companions were also prone to mites, and had their own little cleaning routines, with handlers picking gently through feathers to remove pests. And then, of course, there were the more mystical solutions: charms against lice, prayers for flea-free beds, amulets worn to ward off infestation. These may not have worked in a scientific sense, but they provided comfort and a sense of protection in a world that was constantly alive with creatures too small to truly see. Because what's most striking in all of this is not the presence of bugs. Those were inevitable, but the way people coped. With gentleness, with patience, with the kind of daily diligence that didn't promise miracles but offered small comforts. So now, as you lie wrapped in your own soft bedding, free from such nightly battles, you might feel a quiet gratitude for clean sheets, for bugless sleep, and for all the countless hands long ago that combed, aired, brushed, and hoped, simply to make life more comfortable. Picture, if you will, a woman by candlelight, carefully parting her son's hair. A laundress shaking out a blanket by the river. A monk airing his straw mattress with a sigh. These were not grand gestures, but they were loving ones, because in the long war against tiny tenants, the real victory was in the care. As we drift deeper into the subtleties of medieval life, we come now to something elusive, invisible, and yet ever-present: scent. The way a person smelled in the Middle Ages was not just a private matter. It was a kind of language, a statement, a small but powerful signal sent to everyone around them. Tonight we step softly into that fragrant and sometimes not so fragrant world, where herbs and flowers, smoke and sweat, Wealth and weather all mingled to create the scented landscape of the past. Let's begin with a truth that's often forgotten. People in the Middle Ages were keenly aware of smell. They lived closer to nature, to livestock, to labor, to each other. Without industrial perfumes or deodorants, a person's natural scent, enhanced or softened by what they wore, where they worked, what they ate, spoke volumes. And because the world around them was full of strong smells, both pleasant and unpleasant, people noticed the difference. They noticed who smelled sweet, who smelled clean, and who didn't. So how did they cope? First, with the tools they had, herbs, oils, and flowers. The same rosemary and lavender that hung from rafters in flavored stews also played a central role in personal scent. People tucked bundles of dried herbs into their sleeves, tied small pouches of flowers to their belts, or pinned fragrant posies to their undergarments. These weren't simply decorations. They were personal scent barriers worn like quiet armor against the odors of crowded streets and unwashed bodies. And then there were scented waters. These were homemade or purchased from local apothecaries. Delicate blends of rosewater, orange blossom, violet, or clove steeped in vinegar or wine. People used them to wash their hands and faces, to rinse hair, to freshen clothing. A drop on the neck, a splash in the basin. The scent lingered. For the wealthy, the options expanded. Noblewomen might keep small silver vials of perfume near their mirrors or have their gloves steeped in sweet-smelling oils. A quiet luxury known as perfumed leather. Cloaks were brushed with lavender oil. Bedding was dusted with dried iris root. Hair was combed with rosemary-infused tonics. Even fans and veils could be scented with flower petals, pressed between folds of linen until their fragrance soaked in. Among the upper classes, scent became a form of status. To smell clean, even delicate, was to show that you did not work with your hands, that you had time for baths and cloths and scented waters. A strong perfume wasn't always necessary. A faint whiff of rose or mint was enough to signal care, refinement, even piety. Because cleanliness was not only about health, it was about morality. Many people believed that bad smells indicated spiritual corruption, disease, or disorder. To stink was not merely unfortunate, it could be suspicious. And so even the modest tried to keep their scent as fresh as their means allowed. They aired out clothing, rubbed herbs onto their skin, chewed aniseed or fennel for breath. They sprinkled vinegar on their hands and wiped their necks with cloths dipped in cool floral water. These simple rituals made a difference, not just to the body but to the spirit. Of course, not everyone succeeded. Some people, often due to poverty, illness, or hard labor, carried strong body odor, the scent of smoke, of sweat, of earth, of damp wool. In cities where people lived close together, the mingling of so many smells could be overwhelming. And so, portable fragrances became popular. Small pomanders worn on chains, filled with dried herbs or resins, scented wax tablets kept in pouches, even handkerchiefs perfumed with oils, raised discreetly to the nose in moments of discomfort. Interestingly, the human body itself was seen as having natural odors that could be either virtuous or offensive. Sweet breath, warm skin, and scented hair were admired. Rank sweat, sour mouths, or unwashed garments were avoided. A clean-smelling person was thought to be in balance, physically and morally. And this perception shaped not only personal hygiene, but also how people judged one another. Perfume, then, was not just a tool. It was a form of social navigation. In courts and cities, it was a way to rise above the noise, a wafting whisper of elegance. In churches, it could symbolize purity. In private homes, it was a comfort, a way of marking space as safe, clean, sacred. But perfume was not always a luxury. Many women, even in modest homes, made their own scented waters from boiled herbs and floral distillates. They kept rose petals in earthen jars, steeped violets in wine, or crushed herbs into salt to be sprinkled into wash basins. These small acts were not vanity. They were practical, protective, even devotional. A well-scented home was a place of order. A well-scented body, a sign of care. And yet there were times when scent was not about sweetness, but survival. During plagues or outbreaks, many believed that good smells could drive away bad air. the so-called miasma that was thought to spread illness. People carried bunches of herbs, burned aromatic wood, walked with sponges soaked in vinegar and thyme held to the mouth and nose. They masked the world with scent, hoping to keep its dangers at bay. And sometimes, it helped. At the very least, it calmed the mind, offered control, gave the illusion of safety in a world of uncertainty. So tonight, as you breathe softly in your own space, think of those who lived centuries before, lighting a candle beside a bowl of rose water, tucking lavender under their pillow, combing rosemary through their hair before stepping out into the world. Think of the quiet dignity of choosing to smell pleasant, not out of pride, but out of kindness, to oneself, to others. Because in the end, that's what scent was. Not a mask, but a message. A whisper of care, a gentle invitation. And long after the herbs have faded and the oils have dried, the memory of that care still lingers, soft as a breeze through a summer window. Close your eyes if you'd like. Let your breath fall into rhythm, soft and steady. Picture cobbled streets underfoot, the late afternoon sun catching on old clay roof tiles, the smell of wood smoke and warm herbs drifting from open shutters. And now imagine turning a corner and seeing a building set slightly apart. Stone walls warm from the day, small windows fogged with gentle steam. Welcome to the medieval public bathhouse, a place not of haste, but of gathering, ritual, and the curious comfort of shared water. Bathhouses in the Middle Ages were far more than places to get clean. They were community hubs, places of conversation, healing, even flirtation. Whether you were a weaver, a widow, a baker, or a bored nobleman, the bathhouse offered a brief pause from the wear and toil of daily life, a moment to let go, to soak, and to be, just be maker in the warmth. Let's step inside. The door creaks, and at once a wave of heat greets you. The air is thick with the scent of lavender, rosemary, maybe even sweet flag or marjoram. A low murmur of voices, water lapping gently, and a rhythmic dripping from a high pipe create a soft soundtrack of ease. The bathhouse is divided into rooms, not by stark walls, but by partitions, curtains, or even changes in elevation. In one chamber, the water is hot, nearly steaming. In another, it's tepid, cooling as the day draws on. Some bathhouses even had cold plunge pools for the brave or the sore of limb. People undress behind modest screens or in changing areas, lined with benches. Clothing is folded carefully, tucked into linen wraps and set aside. And then, slowly, they step into the water. There is no rush. A visit to the bathhouse could take hours. You might begin by sitting on the edge, dipping your feet, chatting with a neighbor about the price of apples or the rumors from the next town over. Someone might bring a wooden tray of food, a slice of cheese, a heel of bread, a jug of weak wine. Another might sing quietly, the song half hummed, half lost in the rising steam. And bathing itself? It's done with intention. An attendant might pour warm water from a jug over your shoulders. You might scrub your arms with a linen cloth soaked in herb water. Friends helped each other wash backs, rinsed hair, or shared perfumed oils stored in small wax-sealed bottles. Sometimes bathhouses even offered massage, using olive oil, beeswax balm, or heated stones. The setting could be rustic or ornate. In rural villages, the bathhouse might be a converted shed near a stream, its floors made of packed earth and the tubs carved from old barrels. In larger towns, it might be built of stone with tiled walls, high ceilings, and murals of vines, saints, or stylized waves curling like ribbons. In some places, bathhouses were attached to inns, allowing weary travelers to clean themselves after long days on muddy roads. In others, they stood beside bakeries, sharing heat from the ovens to warm their waters. The bathhouse was, in many ways, the great equalizer. Here, nobles and merchants, farmers and friars, might soak side by side. Conversations flowed more freely in the warmth. Grudges softened, jokes were shared. And though social rules still held, of modesty, of class, of decorum, There was something undeniably communal about the water, a sense that for a few hours at least, everyone was simply human. Of course, customs varied. In some cities, men and women bathed together. In others, they used the same space at different hours or on alternating days. Church leaders often debated the morals of public bathing, worried that such settings could lead to improper behavior. And yes, in certain bathhouses, this concern was not unfounded. But many bathhouses worked hard to maintain their reputations. Rules were posted, attendants enforced etiquette, separate entrances were marked clearly. And for the majority of patrons, the goal was simple: to be warm, to be clean, and to feel, just for a little while, at peace. There were even bathhouse rituals tied to the seasons and the calendar. Before holy days, people flocked to bathe. Brides visited the bathhouse before weddings, often accompanied by female friends and relatives. After childbirth, women were sometimes given ceremonial baths to mark their recovery. Even during periods of mourning, a quiet soak was seen as both cleansing and comforting. And then there were the bathhouse festivals, evenings when candles floated in bowls across the surface of the water, when music played softly and small. Cakes were served on trays of polished wood. These were moments of celebration, reflection, and quiet joy. For those too ill or too frail to visit, water was brought from the bathhouse and used at home. In some communities, bathhouse water was thought to have healing properties, especially when infused with certain herbs or drawn on specific feast days. And for many, the bathhouse was a place of emotional renewal. Widows found comfort there. Friends reconnected. Loneliness, if only briefly, lifted in the steam. The physical cleansing became something more, a shedding of heaviness, of fear, of grief. So tonight, as you lie in your own quiet room, picture yourself stepping into that world. Feel the warmth rise up around your calves. Hear the water ripple gently as you settle in. Smell the rosemary and sweet mint, the faint smoke of the hearth. Someone hums an old tune. A small child giggles across the room. Steam blurs the edges of everything, turning strangers into silhouettes. This is not just a bath. It is a return to stillness, to warmth, to the shared human need for touch, for cleanliness, for connection. And even now, across centuries and oceans, we carry echoes of it, in every hot shower after a long day, in every deep soak on a cold night, in every sigh of comfort as warm water wraps around a tired body. The bathhouse lives on. The world outside the monastery walls was a tapestry of markets, muddy roads, hearth smoke, and the joyful chaos of ordinary life. But within the cloisters, a different rhythm unfolded, slower, more deliberate, shaped by prayer, silence, and an enduring pursuit of purity. Tonight we enter the sacred, measured world of medieval monasteries, where hygiene was not only a matter of health, but a matter of the soul. In an age when spiritual life shaped every part of daily living, monasteries stood as islands of order in an often disorderly world. And within these stone sanctuaries, cleanliness took on a holy meaning. It was not vanity nor luxury, but a form of discipline, a way to prepare the body for devotion and the heart for contemplation. Let us begin quietly. At dawn, the monastery wakes not with chatter or commotion, but with the gentle tolling of a bell. The sound ripples through cool stone corridors. A monk stirs from his straw mattress, rises in silence, and washes his face in the dim light. A simple basin of water, cold and clear. This act, so small, marks the first step in a day of many rituals. Washing in monasteries was routine and regulated. Rules differed slightly between orders, Benedictine, Cistercian, Augustinian, but all placed value on physical cleanliness. Monks were expected to wash their hands before meals, after work, and before prayers. Their habits, though modest, were kept neat. Their bedding was aired. Their hair, often kept short or shaved in a tonsure, was combed with care. In larger monasteries, this care extended to specialized spaces. There were lavatoria, stone washing rooms often located near the refectory, where monks could rinse their hands before eating. These were long troughs fed by gravity-driven water channels lined with smooth stone, and equipped with carved basins and communal towels. Water in the monastery was not drawn at random. It was part of an intricate system. Many monasteries were built near springs or rivers, and their architects engineered clever aqueducts and channels to carry water where it was needed, to the kitchens, the gardens, the fish ponds, and the washing areas. Water moved like a quiet servant, present and purposeful, and once a week, or sometimes more depending on the rule, monks bathed. Bathing was simple. No perfumes, no long soaks, just water, a cloth, a bit of soap when available, and a moment of privacy. The goal was not indulgence, but readiness. One must not enter the chapel with dust clinging to the skin, nor sit among brothers in filth. Cleanliness, after all, was part of spiritual discipline. To wash was to remove not just physical soil, but inner distraction. It was an act of humility, to present oneself clean before God, before the community, and before the silence of prayer. In this way, hygiene became something sacred. But monks were also practical. They tended to gardens, cared for the sick, labored in the scriptorium or the fields. Their hands grew calloused and stained. Their robes collected dust. And so hygiene was not about pristine appearances, but about order and rhythm. A monk did not need to shine, but he needed to be attentive. Monasteries often housed infirmaries, where not only the sick but the elderly and the weak were bathed, tended, and gently anointed with oils. Monks trained in herbal medicine created salves and washes, not only to heal wounds but to soothe the weary. Clean cloths, warm water, and soft murmurs of care were among the tools of the monastic healer. And even those who could not bathe regularly due to age or illness were sponged down carefully, often with infusions of thyme, chamomile, or vinegar. Bedding was part of this care too. Straw mattresses were fluffed and changed. Linen sheets were washed in turns. Blankets, though rough, were aired in sunlight, shaken free of dust and fleas. The dormitory was a place of shared rest, and so cleanliness mattered, not for comfort alone, but for harmony. The kitchens, too, followed rules of hygiene. Bowls were rinsed after each meal, wooden utensils scrubbed with sand or herbs. Cooks washed their hands before preparing bread or porridge. Food was stored properly, waste disposed of carefully. Rats and insects were discouraged with smoke and mint leaves, because in the monastery, even the smallest act was an echo of discipline. There were rituals for cleansing after certain tasks, like burying the dead or working with the poor. There were feast days and fast days when extra washing was done, garments changed, shoes polished. Some monks even engaged in symbolic cleansing, washing each other's feet on holy days in an act of service and humility. But not all was solemn. There was also quiet humor, jokes about the icy splash of early morning water, the stubbornness of a lice-infested tunic, the creaky knees of older brothers who grumbled through the weekly bath. These moments, gentle and human, made life in the monastery warmer than the stone walls suggested. And while monks took vows of poverty and silence, their hygiene habits echoed something universal, a yearning for purity, peace, and dignity. Even in solitude, they cared for their bodies. Even in prayer, they noticed the scent of rosemary on their fingers, or the feeling of clean cloth against the skin. Even in silence, they heard the soft gurgle of water through the channel and found comfort in its constancy. So now, as you lie still and quiet, perhaps you feel a little of their calm. The still basin, the folded towel, the cold water on warm skin, a single bell tolling across the hills. Hygiene here was not a luxury. It was a rhythm, a devotion, a path, and maybe, even now, we walk a version of that path, in every hand washed before, a meal, every fresh bedsheet smoothed at night, every moment we choose to care for the self with simplicity and grace, because sometimes the cleanest places are also the quietest. Picture a quiet medieval village at dusk. Smoke curls gently from cottage chimneys. Chickens cluck softly as they settle in for the night. A low breeze carries the scent of earth, firewood, and something faintly floral. lavender perhaps, or the last of the wild thyme. And inside one of these homes, and perhaps thatched, perhaps timbered, maybe even stone, a woman kneels with a straw broom in her hand, sweeping slowly, methodically. The hearth glows behind her. A pot simmers low. Somewhere nearby, dried herbs hang in bunches, swaying slightly as if breathing. Welcome to the world of medieval household cleanliness. Though medieval homes lacked the conveniences we now take for granted, no running water, no vacuum cleaners, no bottled disinfectants, they were far from neglected. In fact, many medieval people took pride in keeping their homes tidy, scented, and relatively pest-free, using tools and traditions shaped by generations of practice and patience. Let's begin with the most fundamental task of all: sweeping. Floors in most medieval homes were made of packed earth, rough stone, or timber planks. These surfaces collected dust, ashes, bits of straw, and the occasional insect. To manage this, every home had a broom, often made of tied birch twigs, rushes, or straw lashed to a sturdy wooden handle. Sweeping was a daily task, and sometimes more than once. Ashes from the hearth had to be cleared. Food crumbs from wooden tables often ended up on the floor. Straw scattered from bedding or drying herbs crumbled underfoot. A quick rhythmic sweep kept everything in its place, or at least out of the way. In larger or wealthier homes, rushes or straw were laid across stone floors, not as litter, but as flooring. These rushes were swept up and replaced regularly, often scented with dried lavender, mint, or chamomile. The herbs weren't just decorative, they freshened the air and helped repel fleas and other pests. And here we find our next important layer: scenting. Medieval homes may have lacked perfumed sprays, but they made up for it with natural, gentle fragrance, woven directly into daily life. Herbs played a central role. People scattered crushed mint or marjoram in corners. They simmered rosemary or sage in cooking pots not just for flavor, but to sweeten the air. In sick rooms or winter months, they burned juniper branches or sweet-smelling wood to purify the home. Bundles of herbs, sometimes tied with bits of ribbon, were hung over doorways, windows, and beds. These weren't just for scent. They were protective, symbolic, and even spiritual. A sprig of rue above the door to ward off illness. A sachet of lavender in a linen chest to keep moths at bay. And in the kitchen, aromatic foods did double duty. Onions, garlic, leeks, and vinegar were all believed to cleanse the air. A pot of stew bubbling gently on the hearth filled the home with both warmth and a feeling of order. Now let us wander to another challenge: pests. In a world without sealed pantries or airtight jars, keeping out insects and rodents was a constant concern. Food was stored carefully, high up if possible in clay pots or wooden boxes with tight-fitting lids. Grain was often kept in bins or hung in sacks. Meat was salted, dried, or smoked. Cheese was wrapped in cloths soaked in vinegar or herbs. To deter mice and rats, people relied on cats, indispensable members of the medieval household. A good mouser was prized, petted, and fed, but expected to earn its keep. Herbs again came into play. Wormwood, tansy, and mint were scattered near doors and windows. Bay leaves were kept near flour bins. Some people believed a sprig of fresh sage in the pantry would keep insects away entirely. Larger households, such as manor houses or inns, might employ boys or servants to trap or chase vermin, using sticks, dogs, or simply a keen eye. And what of insects? Flies were a nuisance in summer. People hung strips of sticky cloth near windows or burned rosemary and elder leaves to smoke them out. Fleas and lice, as we've seen, were ever-present concerns, so bedding was aired, straw changed, blankets beaten and dusted with dried. Herbs, even cobwebs, had their place. While many homes had corners with webs, considered by some as signs of good luck, they were also swept away regularly, especially before feast days or when important guests were expected. Clean corners, clear walls, and orderly hearths were part of a well-run home. Water, though less available than today, was used frequently and with care. Homes near rivers or wells collected water daily. Buckets were filled for cooking, washing, and cleaning. Hands were rinsed before meals. Cloths were dipped and wrung for wiping down benches, washing pots, or cleaning small children. Soap, if available, was made from fat and ash. Otherwise, people used vinegar, sand, or herbs to scour surfaces. Coarse linen rags, reused until threadbare, served as sponges, cloths, and towels. Children were taught early to help. Sweep the corners, hang the herbs, chase the hens out of the kitchen. And during the great feast days, Easter, Christmas, Midsummer, the whole household joined in a deep, clean, scrubbing walls, replacing rushes, washing curtains and cloths, polishing pewter and making everything fresh for celebration. And amidst all this labor, there was a certain quiet pride. A clean home was a source of peace. It welcomed neighbors, hosted meals, cradled sleep. It did not have to be perfect. Few were, but it had to be tended, cared for, filled with the scent of soap and stew and straw warmed by fire. So tonight, as you rest, perhaps think of those homes, lit by candlelight, shaped by hand and habit. Think of the soft whisper of a broom on a stone floor, the rustle of lavender, drying in a beam of afternoon sun, the hush of a clean room, waiting for night to fall. Because a medieval home, in its own way, knew the same truth we do, that a clean space is a gentle comfort, not perfection, but care, and that care, one sweep, one scent, one quiet ritual at a time, makes even the humblest place feel like home. In our modern world, cleanliness is often marked by the daily, the morning shower, the evening routine, the weekly laundry. But in the Middle Ages, hygiene was not always shaped by the clock, it was shaped by the seasons. Tonight, let's drift softly through the year, following the rhythms of medieval life as they shifted with the turning of the earth. A time when washing, bathing, and household care ebbed and flowed not by schedule, but by sun and frost, feast and fast, planting and harvest. Because for most people in the medieval world, life and cleanliness was seasonal. Let's begin. In spring. Spring was a time of renewal, not just in fields and forests, but in bodies and homes. After the long months of winter when water was cold, days were short, and warmth was reserved for survival, spring brought with it a kind of release. Snow melted. Rivers ran faster. Wells filled again with fresh, cold water. This was the time. For deep cleaning, homes were swept from rafter to hearth, rushes replaced, bedding aired, clothes washed with extra care. People bathed, not just to feel fresh, but to prepare for Easter, for Lent's end, for the return of market days and social life. Women steeped herbs to scent garments. Children were scrubbed before festivals. Tools were cleaned. Stables mucked out. Everything, it seemed, was to be made new again. Bathhouses saw more visitors. Scented waters were stirred. Hair was trimmed, faces shaved, fingernails tended. Spring was not just the return of flowers. It was the return of cleanliness as celebration. Then came summer, bright, long, abundant. This was the season of sweat, of labor in the fields, of dusty roads and sun-warmed backs. With more light, more warmth, and more activity, hygiene habits had to adjust. People washed more frequently, their faces, their feet, their hands after labor. Riverbanks became social spots as women washed linen and shared news. Children splashed in shallow pools. Herbs like mint and lemon balm were gathered in quantity, dried for storage or used fresh in rinse water. But summer also brought insects, fleas, flies, lice. And so the struggle for cleanliness turned strategic. Beds were stripped, furs stored with mint, windows covered with gauze or linen. Homes were swept daily, doors left open to the breeze, but herbs hung to discourage pests. In towns, bathhouses did brisk business. Merchants, pilgrims, nobles, all sought relief in warm or tepid water. And on feast days, special baths might be prepared at home. Buckets of water warmed by the sun, infused with herbs, poured over tired bodies in the shade. For all its heat, summer was a time of body consciousness. a time when sweat and scent were most obvious and therefore most managed. Then slowly came autumn, the harvest months, a time of gathering, storing, preparing for the cold. Hygiene, too, took a turn. The frantic activity of summer eased into something steadier, quieter. Clothes were mended, boots patched, gloves lined with fur. Linen was washed and stored. Scented sachets were stitched, filled with cloves and rosemary, to keep with winter bedding. People took final baths before the chill, preparing themselves for what might be long weeks without. Oils were applied to skin, hair trimmed, braids, tied tighter. Soaps were made and stored, vinegar jars sealed. This was a time for preparing not just the pantry, but the body, to face cold months with care, and then came winter, the hardest time for cleanliness, and often the quietest. Bathing became rare unless one lived in luxury. Water had to be carried, heated, guarded from freezing. Homes were closed tight. Smoke clung to clothing. Straw covered cold floors. Blankets stayed on beds longer. Layers of wool, linen, and fur were not removed lightly, but people still found ways to stay clean within reason. Hands were washed after meals. Faces wiped with cloths warmed near the fire. Vinegar was used to refresh the skin. Dry brushing, with cloth, straw, or even snow, served where water could not. Herbal powders were used on hair and feet. Gloves and hoods were kept clean, and, though full bathing was rare, scent was still present. Fireplaces burned bundles of pine. Boughs of fir and spruce were hung inside. Candles were made with beeswax and herbs. Even the cold air itself, sharp and dry, brought a kind of natural cleanliness, and then, as days lengthened again, the cycle began anew. Because the medieval year was not simply a list of months, it was a song, a pattern, a breathing shape. People tuned themselves to it. Hygiene was not constant. It was responsive, to warmth, to labor, to festival, to faith. Feast days brought baths. Pilgrimages brought preparation. Weddings, births, funerals, all marked by specific rituals of washing, dressing, purifying. Even the church calendar shaped cleanliness. Before Lent, before Easter, before Christmas, people prepared, not just in prayer, but in body. The outer world reflected the inner. So tonight, as you lie still beneath your blanket, consider your own seasonal habits. The first warm weather sheet change, the deep spring clean, the long winter night with a mug of something warm and a soft, worn robe. You too, in your own way, are part of that rhythm, because even now, centuries later, we know the world turns, the body follows, and cleanliness, like rest, like breath, like prayer, is not only daily, it is seasonal. Let us settle in now, slowly, and imagine ourselves within the hushed walls of a medieval infirmary. The air is still, dim, gently scented with lavender and vinegar. A fire murmurs in a stone hearth. Soft footsteps echo against cool flagstones. And somewhere behind a linen curtain, a patient stirs, not in pain, but in the warmth of care. Tonight we enter the quiet intersection of hygiene and medicine in the Middle Ages, a place where healing was not always swift, but always tender. Where cleanliness, however imperfect, was seen as not just comfort, but cure. In a world without modern hospitals, antibiotics, or germ theory, medicine was more art than science. It drew from faith, tradition, observation, and the slow wisdom of touch and scent. And at the heart of it all was the belief that the body, and the spaces it inhabited, needed to be ordered, clean, and calm. Let us begin with the body itself. When a patient fell ill, the first steps taken were not always drastic. They were gentle, cleansing, restoring. Clothes were changed. The face was wiped with warm cloths. Hands were washed with water steeped in chamomile or sage. The bed was straightened, straw fluffed, sheets replaced if possible. A fresh rush mat might be laid beneath the bed, curtains drawn slightly open to let in air. These small acts were more than appearances. They were part of an ancient understanding. that a clean body in a clean space had a better chance of healing. Monastic infirmaries in particular practiced this with care. The monks who tended the sick, often trained in basic herbal medicine, understood the value of warm water, simple washing, and scented air. They knew that sweat left to sit on the skin brought discomfort, that soiled linens could stir restlessness, that a basin of rose water placed by the bed soothed both breath and spirit, and so they washed. Not always fully, but enough. Enough to calm a fevered brow, to rinse aching feet, to lift a hand to the lips with cool, sweet-smelling water. Even, the tools of care were washed, wooden bowls scrubbed clean, knives wiped with vinegar, rags boiled and dried in the sun. The herbs, too, were steeped not only to drink, but to clean, thyme and vinegar for wounds, salt water for rinsing, lavender for wiping surfaces and soft cloths alike. In the homes of common folk, healing followed similar lines, though with fewer resources. When someone grew ill, neighbors came. The fire was stoked, clean straw laid down, water was fetched, heated if possible, and cloths readied. A mother might wash her child's face gently with nettle water. A wife might rub her husband's back with warmed oil and rosemary. An elder might sprinkle wine over a wound, not as miracle, but as hope. Bathing, too, could be medicinal. A warm soak in herb-infused water was used to ease aches, open pores, soften breathing. Baths were sometimes drawn for those with fever, followed by a rub-down with vinegar and mint. For others, a foot bath was enough to warm the blood, to still the nerves, to signal that someone was watching, helping, caring, because healing was not always a fight. Sometimes it was a whisper. Of course, not all understood illness the same way. Disease was seen through the lens of the four humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Balance was health. Imbalance was illness. And while some treatments involved cutting or leeches, others focused on cleansing of the body, the air, and even the mind. A person too full of phlegm might be encouraged to sweat through warmth, washing, or steam. Someone thought melancholy might benefit from fresh air, scented oils, or a room swept clean of dust and noise. A weak stomach might be soothed by gentle broths and a clean, warm bed. Even plagues brought their own rituals of hygiene. Though the causes were misunderstood, people believed that bad air spread disease. And so they burned herbs, washed more often, sprinkled vinegar across floors and clothes. They carried bundles of herbs to the nose, not just for scent but for safety. Physicians and apothecaries wore long robes and sometimes scented masks, not only to shield but to ward, to cleanse the very air around them. And in death, too, there was cleaning. The body was washed before burial, hair combed, nails trimmed, a clean shift laid over the chest. This was not only tradition, it was tenderness. To leave the world clean just as one entered it. So as you rest now, perhaps reflect on your own experiences of care. The cool cloth on a feverish forehead, the warm bath after a long, aching day, the scent of soap and lotion in a quiet hospital room, the way someone straightens your pillow, brings you tea, sits nearby without speaking. These are not just acts of kindness. They are the same acts, the same gentle rituals that healed in the Middle Ages. They are the cleaning of the bowl, the changing of the linen, the steeping of mint in water, the brushing of hair before prayer, the folding of hands, the soft hush that says, "I see you. I want you well." Because long before science explained it, people knew. To be clean was not simply to avoid dirt. It was to be cared for. And sometimes that care, warm water, soft cloth, quiet hands, was all the medicine one needed. The fire crackles softly in the hearth. Outside, the village sleeps beneath a pale moon. And in a quiet corner of a simple home, a mother bends over a small wooden cradle, gently dabbing her child's cheeks with a cloth soaked in lavender water. It is a tender moment, unseen, unremarked by history books, and yet one of countless moments that wove together the fabric of medieval parenting. Tonight, we slip gently into the quiet rhythms of childcare and cleanliness in the Middle Ages, a world where mothers, And fathers, despite every hardship and lack of modern tools, still did what parents across all ages do. They tried to keep their children clean, warm, and well. We begin, as always, with the very young. Infancy was a vulnerable time. Illness came easily. Winters were hard. Water had to be fetched by hand, warmed with care, scented when possible. But love and attention were rarely in short supply. Newborns were often swaddled tightly in strips of linen. This wrapping helped keep them warm and, according to the beliefs of the time, helped their limbs grow straight and strong. These swaddling cloths were changed and cleaned frequently, especially if soiled, and mothers often hung them to dry by the fire, gently, steamed and aired overnight. Bathing a baby was done carefully. The water was warm, not hot. Herbs were steeped in the bath. Chamomile for calming, rosemary for strength, a little salt to purify. A wooden tub or even a large ceramic basin might serve as the bath. Sometimes, especially in colder months, children were bathed by sponge, with linen cloth soaked in warmed water, then gently wrung and pressed to the skin. Soap, when used, was mild, often made from olive oil or animal fats. Many mothers preferred herbal rinses, believing that certain flowers and leaves not only cleaned but protected. Infants were dried with soft cloths, their skin rubbed gently with oil or warmed butter to prevent chapping. And while diapers in the modern sense didn't exist, babies were often laid on layers of linen or straw which could be cleaned or replaced. In colder regions, wool was sometimes used, both absorbent and warm. Parents learned quickly to keep extra cloths at hand and to wash and sun-dry the soiled ones as part of the daily rhythm. Older children learned cleanliness by example. They washed their faces in the mornings, often with cold water, gasping and laughing as the splash woke them. Hands were rinsed before meals and again after chores. Mothers kept small cloths in aprons to wipe muddy fingers, scraped knees, dripping noses. In wealthier homes, a nursemaid or servant helped with these tasks. But in most places it was the mother, or older siblings, who gently taught the lessons of water and cloth, of neatness and care. Hair was combed daily, not only for neatness but to keep lice at bay. Wooden or bone combs were passed down, from mother to daughter, their teeth worn smooth by years of use. Sometimes children's hair was washed with vinegar water, or a rinse made of mint and nettles. Afterward it was braided or tied back, both for tidiness and to keep it out of the way during play or chores. Boys returning from muddy fields, girls with dirt under their fingernails from the garden. They were cleaned not with scolding, but with patience. Feet were washed at night, especially in summer. A small basin of water, perhaps warmed slightly over the hearth, was set by the bench. The day's dust, sweat, and small injuries were tended to quietly, often with a cloth soaked in thyme or sage. A child might fall asleep with the scent of herbs still on their skin, feet tucked beneath a woolen blanket, hair smelling faintly of smoke and lavender. And of course, there were moments of mischief and mess. Children played in streams, rolled in hay, chased geese, tumbled in dust. They were scolded lovingly, wiped clean with soaked cloths, and sent off again into the world of games and giggles. Cleanliness was important, yes, but so was joy. Clean clothes were a challenge, too. Most children had few garments, perhaps one tunic for daily wear, and a better one for feast days. These were often made of linen beneath and wool above. The linen could be washed regularly. The wool was brushed, aired, and repaired. Mothers took pride in keeping these clothes clean. Even poor households tried to ensure that a child arrived at church or a festival looking presentable. Garments were scrubbed on wash days, then hung to dry in wind and sunlight. Some mothers dabbed clothes with lavender or sage water as they folded them, believing the scent would keep illness and insects away. In winter, staying clean was harder. Baths were fewer, water was colder, but cloths were warmed by the fire, vinegar rinses used more often, and hair brushed thoroughly each evening. Blankets were shaken out, children bundled up, and beneath all of this was love expressed through labor. The combing, the washing, the folding, the late-night soothing of a child with a bellyache, the early morning splash of water on sleepy cheeks. These were not just chores. They were rituals of connection, physical acts of devotion. Even in monasteries and orphanages, children were bathed, their bedding changed, their hands inspected before meals. Cleanliness was a form of moral training, a way to teach order, humility, and respect. And always it was wrapped in something tender. So as you rest, now imagine a mother in the stillness of early dawn, smoothing the hair from her child's forehead, a father kneeling by the hearth showing his son how to rinse his feet, a grandmother folding a clean tunic with fingers worn but careful, a sister wiping her baby brother's face after supper, humming quietly, because to keep a child clean, especially in a world full of dust and smoke and toil, was never easy, but it was always worth it. Let us wander now into softer shadows, not those of the sick room or bathhouse, but of the evening just before a feast, or the golden edge of an afternoon stroll through a village square. This is the world of medieval courtship, of whispered glances, nervous hands, and quiet preparation. And here, perhaps more than anywhere else, cleanliness took on a deeply human importance, because to be clean, in this context, was not simply to be tidy. It was to be worthy of notice, of nearness, of love. Let us begin with the preparations. Young man stands before a small, polished piece of metal, a mirror of sorts, though not perfectly clear. He smooths his hair with wet fingers, then rubs a bit of rosemary oil onto his beard. His tunic has been brushed carefully. He changed his linen undershirt earlier when the sun was still high. Now he dabs his wrists with vinegar steeped in lavender, then tucks a small sprig into the seam of his sleeve. He is not a prince. He is not wealthy. But tonight, he wants to be seen and remembered. In another home, a young woman adjusts the folds of her headscarf. Her hands still smell faintly of the chamomile she used to rinse her hair that morning. Her shift is clean, her outer dress newly patched and carefully laced. Beneath her belt, she's tucked a small pouch of dried mint and marjoram, not flashy, but pleasing. Her cheeks are flushed, not from rouge, but from the warmth of the hearth and the feeling of anticipation. Cleanliness for these two is not vanity. It is intention. In the Middle Ages, people did not date in the modern sense, but courtship, the slow, deliberate movement toward partnership, required attention, not only to words and gestures, but to presentation. A person who arrived to a gathering freshly washed, hair combed, hands clean, clothing neat, even if humble, was making a statement. I care. I respect you. I wish to be near you. Bathing before such events was common. Even among the poor, people tried to wash before feast days, dances, or meetings at church. A quick rinse in the basin, a foot bath, a change of linen. Some dabbed their faces with rose water. Others chewed mint to sweeten the breath or rubbed their fingers with sage before offering a hand. Hair was brushed, often more than once. Shoes were wiped clean, cloaks aired out. The goal was not glamour, but freshness. Smell mattered deeply. In a world with fewer layers of artificial fragrance, people noticed scent acutely. A faint whiff of lavender, the freshness of clean linen, the spice of clove oil or lemon peel. These could stir the heart more powerfully than poetry. A kind scent invited closeness. It lingered in memory. Body odor, by contrast, could push people away. While not stigmatized as severely as it might be today, strong or unpleasant smells were still considered unattractive and even suspicious. A person who neglected their body might also neglect their word or their duty. Cleanliness implied trustworthiness, and so the careful took care. Many kept scented cloths in their pockets. A few dropped fragrant herbs into their shoes. Some rubbed rose water behind their ears, or cleaned under their nails with lemon peel. Lips were softened with beeswax. Hair was sometimes powdered with ground iris root, or dusted lightly with flower petals. These efforts were rarely elaborate, but they were meaningful. In the noble courts, rituals became more formal. Ladies-in-waiting helped noblewomen prepare for appearances. Hair was arranged in intricate braids or curls. sometimes dusted with gold powder or adorned with fresh flowers. Hands were washed in rose water, gowns brushed and adjusted, a touch of crushed strawberry on the cheeks. Gloves, perfumed and folded, knights too prepared with care. They trimmed their beards, cleaned their armor, scented their cloaks. A well-kept appearance reflected inner discipline. A clean knight was a respectable knight, but among common folk the rituals were no less touching. A girl might borrow her mother's best scarf. A boy might re-sew the hem of his tunic the night before a festival. A farmer might bathe in a stream after a long day in the fields, then sit for an hour just letting his hair dry in the wind, thinking about what to say. The goal was always the same: to show up clean, presentable, open. And when love bloomed, when glances became words and words became closeness, the physical mattered more. To hold a hand that was washed, to kiss a cheek that smelled of rosemary, to lean close and not recoil. These were not small things. They were the invisible thread that made intimacy possible. Even within marriage, cleanliness remained part of affection. Couples bathed before holy days. They washed each other's backs, shared herbs, helped brush each other's hair. To care for one's scent was to care for one's partner, to offer not only presence but comfort. In a world of uncertainty, of storms, illness, and toil, these acts of care were anchors. They created trust. They nurtured attraction. So, tonight as you lie still, think of those moments. A boy combing his hair in a puddle's reflection. A girl smoothing the wrinkles from her dress with wet palms. A couple sharing a cloth, laughing as they both try to clean up before a village dance. These are not stories written in history books, but they are real, and they are tender, because to be clean, to be presentable, fragrant, cared for, was not just about hygiene. It was about being ready to be seen, to be touched, to be loved. Close your eyes if you like, and picture a soft morning mist rising over a village. The rooftops glisten faintly with dew. Somewhere nearby, a woman lowers a wooden bucket into a stone well, the rope creaking gently as she draws up the day's first water. The bucket tips, spills just a little, and the water catches the light like melted silver. In the medieval world, this was not just a daily task. It was the beginning of cleanliness. Tonight we turn our attention to the precious, unglamorous, and utterly essential role of water sources in the hygiene of the Middle Ages. Because to be clean, to wash, to bathe, to scrub, to soothe, first required water. And water, as simple as it sounds, was not always easy to come by. Let us begin with wells. In most towns and villages, the well was the heart. It stood in the square or at the edge of the road, sometimes shaded by a tree, sometimes covered by a wooden roof. Here people gathered not just for water, but for news, for gossip, for rhythm. Drawing water was daily work. You came with a bucket, a jug, perhaps a large clay vessel if the family was large. Water from the well was used for drinking, of course, but also for washing hands, faces, feet, for rinsing linens, for cooking, brewing, steeping herbs, for wiping down tables and scrubbing wooden floors. Because every act of cleanliness, every attempt to create comfort, began with a walk to the well. But not all wells were equal. Some drew sweet, clear water. Others tasted of iron or clay. A few dried up in summer. And so people learned to manage, to store rainwater in barrels, to carry water from distant springs, to use what they had wisely. Washing, therefore, became an act of balance. You did not waste water. You did not use more than necessary. A single basin could serve to rinse hands, wipe faces, and clean a child's feet. Leftover water might be poured over herbs for a scented floor wash, or even saved to flush waste. And then there were rivers and streams. For villages near moving water, life was both easier and more alive. The river was the bathhouse, the laundry, the watering hole. People bathed there, especially in summer. They stood knee-deep with bars of soap or handfuls of herbs, scrubbing skin and hair, laughing, cooling off. Families brought clothes to wash, linen tunics, undergarments, aprons. They laid them on flat rocks, beat them gently with paddles, or stones, then rinsed and wrung them with practiced hands. Clean linens dried on bushes or were spread across grass, fluttering like flags in the breeze. Children splashed nearby. Dogs sniffed at baskets. Water ran over smooth stones. It wasn't always quiet, but it was human, joyful, part of the fabric of clean living. But rivers also carried danger. Too close to town, and the water might be fouled by waste or runoff from tanners, dyers, or butchers. People learned to draw water upstream, to wash where it flowed clear. They knew which tributaries were safe. When in doubt, they boiled it, or used it only for laundry and cleaning, saving well water for food and body. And what of the rain? Rain was a gift. Rain barrels sat beneath eaves and thatched roofs, collecting every precious drop. Water from the sky felt clean, soft, almost blessed. It was used for bathing when available, especially for washing hair, as it was thought to be gentler than well water. During storms, children ran outside, faces tilted up, clothes soaked, laughter spilling like thunder. Some families bathed in the rain, not with soap and cloths, but with bare skin and joy. And when barrels were full, mothers used rainwater for steeping herbs, for scrubbing floors, for softening linens stiff from sun and salt. It was never wasted, never taken for granted. In monasteries and noble homes, water systems were more advanced. Aqueducts brought fresh water to lavatories and kitchens. Cisterns held rain for washing. Some monasteries had indoor basins with running water. Gravity fed from nearby hills. Stone gutters carried runoff away, keeping courtyards cleaner. These innovations were rare, but admired. Still, for most, the work was hard. Water was heavy. Buckets full could weigh more than a child. In winter, it froze. In drought, it disappeared. Fetching water was a daily task, often multiple times a day and usually performed by women or older children. And yet they did it, because water was life. Water was cleanliness, comfort, care. To have a full barrel was to have peace of mind. To offer a guest a bowl of water to wash with, a kindness. To wash your child's face with rainwater, a quiet grace. So tonight, as you lie still, perhaps, you'll hear echoes of splashing in a shallow stream, the creak of a bucket over stone, the soft tap of rain into a wooden barrel. Because every act of hygiene in the Middle Ages, from the grandest noble bath to the smallest child's wipe, of a dusty cheek, began with a single truth: water was precious, and those who sought to be clean became guardians of it. Imagine a quiet rustling, straw shifting beneath woolen blankets, the coals in the hearth sighing softly into new flame. It is still dark outside. The village stirs gently. A rooster has crowed once, maybe twice. Somewhere, water drips into a wooden basin, and within a modest timber-framed cottage, a man rubs his eyes and rises to greet the day. Today, we follow him. Not a nobleman, not a monk, not a physician, but a simple villager. Perhaps a blacksmith or a carpenter or a farmer. It doesn't matter. Because across all stations there was a rhythm, a personal daily rhythm of cleanliness that moved softly between chores, meals, rest, and prayer. Let's follow his day from dawn to dusk. He starts with a basin of water, set beside the hearth the night before. The water is cold, drawn from the well at twilight. He dips his hands in first, splashing his face gently, eyes, cheeks, beard. A cloth is nearby, folded and dry. He wets it, wipes behind his ears, along his neck down to his chest. It's not a bath, but it's enough to greet the morning. Next, he takes a comb from the mantel, carved from bone and smooth with use. He draws it through his hair, then his beard, checking with his fingers for lice or tangles. If he finds any, he may reach for the small pouch of dried herbs his wife keeps tucked in a bowl, lavender and rosemary mostly, and rub a bit behind his ears. His clothes have been aired overnight. A clean linen shirt, still faintly smelling of mint. He pulls it on, ties his belt, laces his boots. Over this, a tunic. Then he steps outside, the sky just beginning to brighten with blue and gold. In another home, a woman rises with her youngest child. She tends the hearth, stokes it into a cheerful flame, then prepares a cloth soaked in warm water to wipe her daughter's hands and face. The child giggles and squirms. The mother hums quietly as she smooths the girl's tangled hair with a wetted comb, then ties it with a strip of cloth. Cleanliness in the morning is not a chore, it is a ritual of readiness. A way of preparing the body for a new day of labor, movement and contact with others. As the sun climbs, our villager heads to the fields. He works with his hands. Soil, sweat, sun. By midday, his tunic is damp at the back, his hands dark with earth. But he's brought a linen cloth with him, rolled at his belt, and when he pauses to eat, he wipes his hands with water poured from a flask. He rinses, his face too, then chews a bit of fennel for his breath. Back at the village, the communal rhythm of cleaning hums quietly. Women air out bedding in the sun. Children sweep with birch twig brooms. Someone dumps soapy water outside from a washing basin. At the edge of a garden, a young boy kneels beside a wooden tub, washing potatoes, and rinsing his muddy feet with the same water when he's done. Cleanliness is woven into work, into movement. It is not a pause from life. It is part of it. In the early afternoon, a woman enters her small kitchen. She washes her hands, carefully with water warmed in a pot, before preparing bread and stew. She wipes the table with a cloth soaked in vinegar and thyme, not because anyone told her to, simply because it's what she's always done. The children return from the fields, dusty, scraped, sun-kissed. They line up at the door. One by one, their hands are rinsed, their faces wiped, their hair checked for ticks. The mother works quietly with care. She knows they'll be back out again in moments. Still, for now, they are clean. By evening, the household slows. Before supper, everyone washes once more. The water is cool but not unpleasant. The father washes his feet, shaking off dirt from the day. The mother washes her arms, neck, and hands. The children scrub behind their ears. It is a time of winding down, of washing away the noise and labor. The meal is quiet, warm. And afterward, as the fire softens and the last light fades, the family shares one final act of cleanliness. Bedding is fluffed. Hair is combed again. A cloth dipped in warm herbal water is passed around, to wash hands, to wipe necks, to soothe tired faces. The youngest is rubbed with a bit of oil to keep their skins soft in the cold, and then they sleep. Not spotless, not sterile, but clean enough, clean in the way that mattered. Skin attended to, space kept tidy, scents balanced between earth and herb. The kind of clean that said, this body is mine, this day was long and now I rest. So as you lie still tonight, perhaps think of them, the man at the basin, the girl with a mint-scented braid, the old woman brushing her sleeves before church, the boy rinsing his feet by moonlight. They lived in a world far less convenient, but they lived with care, and every cloth soaked, every basin filled, every hand rinsed in silence was a quiet act of respect for the body, the self, the day. Cleanliness, after all, is not just about soap and water. It is about attention. And from dawn to dusk in the humblest homes, that attention turned ordinary lives into something quietly sacred. Imagine for a moment two very different mornings. In one, a servant draws warm water into a copper basin, pours in herbs and a few drops of rose oil. A noble woman, still wrapped in linen robes, waits by the window as sunlight slips through stained glass. She will bathe today before breakfast. Her hair will be brushed, her nails cleaned, her gown scented with crushed violets. In another home, smaller, simpler, a mother bends by the hearth, warming water in a blackened pot. Her husband is outside, fetching more from the well. The children are still rubbing sleep from their eyes. Today they will wash quickly in turns with the same basin of water. Their tunics have been scrubbed clean and laid out the night before. There is no perfume, but a sachet of mint is tucked in with the linens. This is the difference that shaped medieval hygiene more than anything else: class. Tonight, we step quietly into that divide, not to judge, but to understand. Because in the Middle Ages, cleanliness was not simply a personal choice. It was also a matter of access, expectation, and social expression. Let's begin with the wealthy. For nobles, lords, and ladies, hygiene was part of daily ritual and image. A clean body reflected not just comfort, but superiority. It suggested refinement, control, and moral uprightness. Wealthy households could afford not only better tools, copper tubs, scented soaps, linen towels, but also the time and help to use them. Baths were drawn indoors. Servants heated water, carried it in pails, poured it over their lords and ladies. Special stools were carved for sitting, tubs padded with cloth. Baths might be shared between spouses or taken alone with privacy screens. Herbs were selected, with care: lavender, rose, sage, thyme. Towels were warmed, lotions applied after drying. Perfumes were common, not overpowering but subtle. Gloves were scented. Hair was treated with oils. Cloaks were brushed and perfumed with smoke or flower sachets. Even shoes were wiped down before important appearances. And there was always a visual performance of cleanliness. Clothing was fresh, often changed daily. Fingernails were manicured, teeth rubbed with linen cloths and flavored pastes. Servants combed hair and dusted skin with powders. All of it whispered, "I am above dirt, above hardship." But this was not laziness. Maintaining such an image took considerable effort, by many hands. Meanwhile, in monasteries and convents, cleanliness was part of spiritual discipline. Monks and nuns lived humbly, but with structured routines. Lavatories were supplied with flowing water. Bathing was scheduled, perhaps once a week. Hands were washed before meals and after work. Hair was kept trimmed, bedding aired, clothes repaired and cleaned. But even here, class made a difference. An abbot or abbess had access to more resources than a novice. Their robes might be better woven, more frequently washed. Their personal cells better ventilated. Their water drawn by others. And outside those walls, in the villages, farms, and towns, cleanliness looked different. For most peasants and laborers, cleanliness was shaped by necessity and rhythm. Water had to be fetched daily, from wells, streams, or rain barrels. Wood had to be chopped to heat it. Soap, if they had it, was homemade or bartered. Clothes were worn multiple days between washings. Linen shirts, and worn close to the skin, were washed more often than wool tunics. Hair was brushed, yes, but often hurriedly. Hands were scrubbed with sand, ash, or rough cloth. Still, there was pride in being clean. A farmer might bathe before a feast day. A servant might wash her hands before setting the table. A mother might wipe her child's face with water steeped in thyme. A craftsman might brush the dust from his sleeves before entering the church. Cleanliness was practical, respectful, often spiritual, but the resources weren't equal. A peasant could not afford perfumed gloves. A laborer might own only one spare tunic. A widow might go months without a full bath in winter. Their sense of cleanliness was not one of luxury but of modesty and maintenance, and this difference could be deeply felt. A noblewoman might view a muddy cloak as offensive. A merchant might judge a customer by their fingernails. A child might be sent away from a manor gate if too dusty. These social lines, though unspoken, were etched in soap and water. Yet there were overlaps. During festivals, the classes drew closer. Everyone washed. Everyone wore their best. In times of illness, rich and poor alike turned to vinegar, herbs, and boiling cloth. In matters of love, a clean face and fresh scent mattered, whether in silk or homespun. And sometimes generosity bridged the gap. A nobleman might gift soap to a poor household. A monastery might allow villagers to bathe in their quarters. A wealthy woman might pass down combs and oils to her maid. These moments, though rare, revealed that cleanliness was shared humanity. So tonight, as you drift off, think of those differences and their echoes today. The fine linen towel versus the rough hemp cloth. The rose-scented gloves versus the straw-scented tunic. The silver basin in a candlelit chamber, and the clay bowl near a smoky hearth. Two different worlds, but both in their own way reaching toward the same thing. A sense of dignity, a respect for the body, a moment of comfort in a world full of dust and labor. Because whether born in a manor or a cottage, every person in the medieval world knew the simple truth. To be clean is to be seen is to matter. The day is done. Shadows lengthen across cobbled streets and thatched rooftops. The last chickens have been ushered into their coop. Hearths glow softly inside warm homes. A faint scent of wood smoke, bread, and herbs drifts into the cool evening air. And within those homes, whether large or small, rich or poor, begins one of the gentlest, most universal of rituals, the quiet preparation for sleep. Tonight we enter this final space, this closing act in the medieval rhythm of life, a time not of labor nor feasting but of calm, of cleanliness in its softest form. Let us begin where most nights begin, the hearth. The fire is banked low, just enough to cast a golden glow. A pot of water, warmed through supper, now serves its second purpose. A cloth is dipped, wrung out. The mother wipes her children's hands and cheeks, gently brushing away the dust and crumbs of the day. One by one they line up. Some squirm, others giggle, but all submit to the ritual, not with resistance, but with comfort. A clean face, before sleep, a cool cloth across the brow, the day made smooth. In wealthier homes the act is similar, though more ornate. Servants carry in scented water, pouring it into ceramic or copper basins. Towels are warmed by the fire. A noblewoman sits on a cushioned stool, letting her maid gently rinse her feet, her hands the nape of her neck. She may dab rosewater behind her ears, comb her hair free of pins and braids. The garments of the day are removed, folded, laid aside. A fresh linen shift is pulled over her head, soft, simple, clean. A knight might do the same. His armor, long set aside, hands washed of oil and sweat, hair combed back from his brow, cloak brushed and hung near the door. He checks his nails, rinses his face, and perhaps rubs his temples with a drop of mint oil. For all the difference in setting, the goal is shared, to feel clean, unburdened, ready to lie down. And while full baths are rare at night, smaller acts of washing are common, a bowl of water set beside the bed, a cloth to wipe one's feet, a cup for rinsing the mouth, a comb or brush, a small bundle of herbs hung over the bedpost, not just for scent, but for dreams. Lavender, sage, rosemary, plants believed to soothe the heart, calm the mind, protect the sleeper. Children are laid down first. Their hair is brushed, sometimes braided to prevent tangles. Their feet wiped, a blanket tucked around their shoulders. Older children may wash their own hands and faces. In some homes, they kneel by the bed and say a prayer. The room fills with hushed voices, yawns, and the creak of wood as beds shift and settle. In monasteries, the nighttime ritual is precise. Silence begins. Brothers or sisters walk quietly to the washroom, dipping hands into stone basins. Some rinse their faces. Others sprinkle water on the floor as a symbol of cleansing the soul. They return to their cells, undress methodically, fold their robes. The final bell echoes in the corridor. Lights are dimmed. All is still. Back in the village, in simpler homes, the last chores are done. Shoes are placed by the door. The broom rests near the wall. A man washes his hands by lantern light, then helps his wife draw the blanket over their straw-filled mattress. She smiles. The day was long, but they have survived it together. The baby stirs in the cradle. The embers whisper in the hearth. And then, the final touch. Hair care. Whether noble or peasant, many people in the Middle Ages took time at night to brush their hair, not only for hygiene, but for comfort. It soothed the scalp, cleared dust, and signaled to the body that rest was near. A woman may brush her daughter's hair with a comb carved by her father, A man may comb out his beard with fingers and oil. It is a simple act, repetitive, calming, almost like prayer. The last light is blown out. The night begins. And in that darkness, in every corner of medieval life, cleanliness accompanies sleep, not in the modern sense. Not sterile, not clinical, but in the sense of readiness. A washed face, a rinsed hand, a body set free from the weight of the day. Bedding straightened, clothes folded, a scent of herbs lingering in the room. It's worth remembering that in those times to sleep peacefully was not always a given. Illness, war, cold, hunger, they lingered outside. But within the home, small rituals made protection, made peace, made dreams possible. And in the stillness, something remarkable happens. The day, however hard, ends in softness. Clean skin, warm cloth, the quiet breath of someone near. So as you close your own eyes tonight, think of them. The woman brushing her hair by candlelight. The child turning beneath a mint-scented sheet. The old man wiping his hands one last time before prayer. The monk folding his robe, his basin empty. Each of them, long ago, gave themselves a simple gift before bed. Not grandeur, not indulgence, just this, a clean beginning to their sleep.